The warp storm tore open above Vordran IX with a soundless violence that bent the sky into spirals of bleeding light, a wound in reality where colors folded into themselves and gravity forgot its purpose. From its churning heart, something fell, a dark shape tumbling through fire and broken dimensions, until the storm spat it out like a rejected fragment of another universe. The impact shook the barren plains beneath the Hive City, a dull tremor rolling through ash dunes and rusted pipelines before fading into the endless industrial silence. Before we descend into the chaos of this tale, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more legends and dark histories from the Warhammer 40k universe. Smoke drifted from the crater, thick and metallic, carrying the scent of scorched ozone and distant battlefields. At its center lay a massive figure wrapped in stitched leather and scarred flesh, its body twitching with the faint memory of the horrors it had once served. Tubes pulsed along its shoulders with an uneven rhythm, forcing corrupted air through a system designed for relentless pursuit. The creature remained still for a long moment, as if listening to a galaxy it did not recognize, until one pale eye flickered open with cold, mechanical purpose. The world around it buzzed with static whispers from a dying warp storm, a low hum that unsettled the soil and stirred broken metal shards across the ground. Red lightning crawled across distant clouds, illuminating the towering silhouette of Hive Bastion Orlia far on the horizon. Millions lived within that labyrinth of steel and stone, unaware that something older than their fears had entered their doomed world. The creature rose slowly, its motions heavy yet unwavering, each step deliberate as if testing this new planet's gravity. There were no memories guiding it now, no voices from its makers, only a primal directive buried deep within the mutated nerves. Hunt, adapt, destroy. In a galaxy built on war and superstition, the arrival of such a being should have been impossible, yet the warp cared little for what should or should not exist. Somewhere beyond the storm, greater powers stirred with faint interest, sensing an anomaly that did not belong to their ancient games. Something that carried no warp signature, no soul, no place in their intricate design. The plains around the crater lay silent, broken only by the creature's steady breathing and the distant thunder of artillery from some ongoing conflict. The air hung heavy with chemical ash and the echo of far-off screams, a familiar scent for a weapon born in ruin. It lifted its head, scanning the horizon with predatory stillness, drawn by movement far beyond the ridges. The wind shifted, carrying the vibrations of armored boots, the clatter of lasguns, the heartbeat of approaching soldiers. A new world, a new battlefield, yet the rhythm felt the same. The creature moved forward, leaving the crater behind with unhurried certainty. In this galaxy of titans, demons, and godlike beings, something far simpler had arrived, something that cared nothing for thrones or empires. Only the hunt mattered. As the creature's heavy steps carried it through the swirling dust, the war-torn landscape seemed to hold its breath, sensing that a new kind of terror had slipped into its endless conflict. And with that quiet, inevitable movement, the galaxy began to change. Vordran IX endured its days beneath a sky stained the color of dried blood, a world shaped by industry, war, and the slow decay that clung to every imperial frontier. Hive Bastion Orlia dominated the horizon like a wounded colossus, its spires rising through drifting smog, its foundations sinking into plains scarred by centuries of mining and bombardment. The hive's outer walls groaned with each shift of the polluted wind, metal plates grinding like ancient bones worn thin by constant strain. Far below those towering heights, the planet's surface stretched in endless fields of rusted machinery and forgotten trenches, each one telling quiet stories of battles that had never truly ended. The planet was officially classified as a mining world, but its ore processing plants had long become fortresses as well, their furnaces burning day and night to keep the Imperium's war machine fed. Conveyor belts rattled beneath dim red lights, carrying minerals scraped from the deep earth, while servo cranes screamed overhead like iron beasts fighting their own madness. Chemicals leaked into soil that no longer felt alive, and the air tasted perpetually of ash and burnt promethium, a flavor the people had learned to accept without question. Human life persisted here, not because of hope, but because survival had become a habit. Beyond the hive's shadow lay the fractured remains of settlements consumed by conflict, each ruin a marker of the slow, creeping corruption that had taken hold. Chaos cults had spread through the wastelands like rot in old wood, their whispers carried by storms that rolled across the plains. They gathered around ancient mining pits and abandoned manufactorums, performing rituals taught by unseen voices, calling for power in a world that offered them nothing else. Their symbols were carved into rockcrete walls and burned into the ground with crude fire, each mark a wound in Vordran IX's already fragile spirit. Imperial Guard regiments stationed on the planet fought back with unyielding discipline, digging trenches around vital supply lines and fortifying strongpoints with whatever metal they could weld together. Their boots marched along the same paths every day, the rhythm of duty echoing against the walls of a hive that no longer fully trusted the ground it stood on. They died in droves to keep the planet stable, yet stability was no longer something Vordran IX could promise. Each week brought new casualties, new breaches, new demands from a distant Imperium that saw only the ore, never the cost. Above them all, unseen by mortal eyes, the warp pressed its weight against the planet's reality. The recent storm had thinned the barrier between dimensions, leaving psychic scars that pulsed faintly through every building and every mind. Servitors malfunctioned without warning, cogitators spat nonsense data, and even the most faithful felt an unease crawling beneath their thoughts. Something had shifted in the air, a sense of being watched by things older than the stars. The world seemed to wait, holding itself tight, uncertain whether the next force to touch it would bring salvation or annihilation. Yet even in its broken state, Vordran IX kept moving. The hive's monorails rattled along cracked rails, carrying workers to furnaces that demanded endless sacrifices of sweat and blood. Defense platforms scanned the sky with jittering machine spirits, wary of the next flare of corruption. Chaos warbands gathered strength in distant ruins, sharpening blades and chanting prayers to their dark patrons. And beneath it all, the planet's heart throbbed with the dull, persistent beat of war, a rhythm that had become the only song its people knew. Into this strained and fragile world, something foreign had fallen, something without a place in any prophecy or archive. Vordran IX did not yet understand the nature of the intruder walking across its wastelands, but the land itself seemed to tremble at the thought of meeting a predator that did not dream, did not pray, and did not belong to any side of the eternal war. The tension clung to every breath the hive expelled, as if the planet sensed the shape of the storm that had just stepped into its borders. Dust settled slowly across the cratered plain as the shape inside it began to move, a subtle shift beneath the drifting ash that signaled the awakening of something built for endings. Far across the ridge, the first humans drew near without understanding the magnitude of what approached their path. An Imperial Guard patrol, 6 soldiers in faded flak armor, marched with practiced caution through the wasteland. Their boots sank into the loose grit with each step, leaving temporary scars that the wind would soon erase. The air around them hummed with the remnants of the warp storm, and every few moments their Vox units crackled with static, as if the machine spirits whispered warnings they could not decipher. Corporal Varen led the squad, a veteran of minor conflicts who clung to routine as a shield against panic. His gaze swept across the horizon, noting the smoke rising from the crater. A new threat, he thought, another aberration birthed from the storm's violent departure. His men shifted uneasily behind him, hands gripping lasguns, knuckles pale under armored gloves. They were not strangers to fear, but the silence ahead felt unnatural, as though the storm had taken sound with it when it tore the sky apart. The squad advanced along the ridge, the crater finally coming into view. Heat shimmered over its surface, concealing the full shape of what waited below. Varen raised a hand for caution, and the patrol halted, spreading out with trained precision. Their breaths fogged inside their rebreathers, each inhale sounding louder than it should in the oppressive quiet. Something twitched in the crater's heart, a faint tremor that flickered like a ripple in a still lake. Varen's mind sharpened with alarm, and he signaled for magnification lenses. Through the enhanced display, the shape became clearer. A towering figure hunched forward, muscles shifting beneath torn flesh that looked half-grown and half-forced into place. Black leather straps and metal buckles dug into its skin as though binding a barely contained storm. Tubes pulsed along its shoulders and spine, exhaling corrupt breaths into the cold air. The creature's posture held the stillness of a machine awaiting activation, yet its presence radiated something primal. A predator waking from slumber. One of the younger guardsmen muttered a prayer under his breath, though the words trembled and lost meaning. Varen steadied himself, lifting his hand in silent command for readiness. The creature stirred again, more deliberate this time. Its head lifted with slow inevitability, revealing an uneven mask of scar tissue and a single exposed eye that glowed with unnatural focus. The moment that eye fixed on the ridge, the entire patrol felt its weight, as if the creature had already mapped every angle of their weakness. The lasguns rose as one, barrels trained on the figure, but intention did nothing to slow what followed. The creature moved with sudden, brutal clarity, launching out of the crater in a single bound that defied its size. The ground buckled beneath its landing, spraying dirt and stone across the ridge. Shock rippled through the patrol as their formation broke instinctively, discipline collapsing under raw instinct for survival. Varen fired first, the lasbolt striking the creature's chest and dispersing with no visible effect. Other shots followed in frantic bursts, their impacts scattering across the creature's flesh without slowing its advance. It closed the distance with terrifying economy of motion. One massive arm swung out, sending a guardsman crashing into the earth with a crack that silenced breath and bone alike. A tentacle burst from its arm in a wet snap, impaling another soldier through the chest before retracting without pause. Varen shouted commands that dissolved into the roar of his own heartbeat. He tried to reroute his squad, tried to bring order back into the chaos, but the creature moved faster than any plan could adapt. A final blow hurled Varen to the ground. His visor cracked, letting polluted air sting his eyes as he struggled to rise. Through blurred sight, he watched the creature stand among the bodies of his squad, breath hissing through its tubes in slow, measured rhythm. It turned its head as if cataloging the scene, confirming the silence of the ridge. There was no triumph in its stance, no hunger for glory, only the cold certainty of something following a directive older than this planet's conflicts. Varen pressed his palm against the Vox unit, forcing a final transmission through static. His voice barely rose above a whisper as he tried to describe what had ended his squad. His words trembled, fading into interference before he could finish. The creature lifted its gaze toward the distant hive, sensing new vibrations, new shapes moving, new threats to pursue. The wasteland seemed to hold its breath as it began to walk, ash curling around its steps. And somewhere far below the hive's steel canopy, alarms flickered to life. A new predator had entered the world, and Vordran IX began to understand that its war had just changed shape. Inside Hive Bastion Aurelia, the command bunker thrummed with the restless energy of a fortress that lived in constant awareness of danger. Screens flickered with tactical readouts, each one updating with jittering lines of data as machine spirits struggled to interpret the aftermath of the recent warp storm. Cogitators clanked in uneven rhythm, producing occasional bursts of nonsense symbols that tech adepts rushed to correct with whispered rites. The air was thick with the smell of oil and heated metal, a familiar scent to those who had served long enough to stop noticing it. Colonel Harvek stood before the main hollow table with arms folded behind his back, his posture rigid despite the fatigue etched into his features. He had weathered decades of conflict on harsh worlds, each scar earned through hard decisions and necessary losses. But the warp storm troubled him in ways he did not openly admit. Storms of that magnitude always left gifts behind, things born of madness that crawled into reality and refused to leave quietly. He waited for the first reports with a heavy certainty that the storm had delivered something new, something unwelcome. The Vox sputtered to life, carrying the dying remnants of Corporal Varen's transmission. Static bled through the message, fragments of panic and broken breaths woven together with words that barely formed coherent warnings. Harvek leaned closer, trying to catch the details between the distortions. Massive bioweapon, unstoppable, not warp-touched, he straightened slowly, his mind falling into cold calculation as he parsed the fragments. This was no demon, no corrupted cultist, no predictable shape in the endless catalog of horrors he had memorized. Tech Priest Mendak's 44 approached with jerking steps, mechadendrites twitching as they fed new data into the hollow table. The priest's voice rasped through a metallic filter, the cadence clipped and emotionless. Sensor sweeps confirmed an anomaly near the ridge. Non-warp biological readings, high-density musculature, and a regenerative signature beyond recognized xenoforms. Harvek felt the room tighten as officers exchanged glances. Something biological, but not connected to the warp, was rare on a world plagued by corruption. Something biological that survived a warp storm's touch was rarer still. Reports from the patrol's biosensors appeared next, their life sign data ending abruptly in a burst of jagged lines. No survivors detected. The squad's vitals had cut out in patterns reminiscent of sudden, overwhelming trauma. Harvek clenched his jaw, absorbing the implications. Whatever this creature was, it had destroyed a patrol before they had time to send clear descriptions. The storm had brought a weapon, one without allegiance to any side he understood. He stepped away from the table, pacing slowly as his thoughts settled into disciplined order. The hive was already strained by chaos incursions in the lower sectors. Cult activity had increased sharply in recent weeks, fueled by whispers of a coming ascension. The Guard could not afford a new unknown threat roaming the wasteland unchecked. Every unpredictable element fed instability, and instability on Vordran IX could only end in collapse. The hive relied on structure, on rule, on predictable violence. This creature was none of those things. Harvek ordered a full containment alert. Stormtrooper companies began suiting up in the arming bays, their armor clattering into place with mechanical finality. Targeting auspex were recalibrated for large biological entities. Meltagun crews checked fuel canisters with trembling hands. Despite their discipline, fear clung to the preparations like dust on steel. They did not know what they were hunting, only that the thing had killed trained soldiers without hesitation. The colonel paused at the central Vox station, issuing a request to hire command for inquisitorial oversight. The decision weighed on him, for summoning the Inquisition always brought consequences. But Vordran IX could not face an unclassified threat alone. The world's fabric was fraying at too many edges. One more tear might invite something far worse. As Harvek returned to the hollow table, the feed updated again, showing fresh movement near the ridge. The anomaly was walking toward the hive. Slow, deliberate, unstoppable. Every footstep registered on seismic sensors, a steady, rhythmic pattern that tripped automated threat protocols. The machine's spirits flagged it as a level beyond the hive's typical dangers. The colonel watched the icon inch closer on the map. Beneath the flickering lights of the bunker, a quiet dread took shape, a realization that the first contact had only been the beginning. The creature had chosen a direction, and its path led straight into the heart of his world. Elsewhere in the hive, sirens began to rise in haunting harmony, echoing through steel corridors. The storm had ended, but something far more dangerous had just begun its march. Far from the ordered tension of the Imperial bunker, chaos thrived in the ruins scattered across Vordran IX's wastelands. broken hab blocks and collapsed manufactorums served as shelter for those who had abandoned imperial law, choosing instead the whispering comfort of the warp. The wind carried remnants of old prayers and forgotten screams, weaving through shattered walls where heretics gathered around crimson fires. These cultists watched the storm's departure with reverence, sensing the subtle tremors left behind like ripples in a dark ocean. Within one such ruin, an abandoned refinery choked with rust and half-collapsed scaffolding, a chaos demagogue knelt before a crude altar made of scavenged bones and metal plates. His body was wrapped in chains etched with symbols forbidden under imperial doctrine, and his eyes burned with the fervor of someone who had stared too long into madness. He felt the disturbances with more clarity than any mortal should. Something had fallen through the warp's thinning skin, a presence alien to both demonkind and humanity. Acolytes gathered around him in shivering silence, each one bearing marks of devotion carved into their flesh. They waited for his interpretation, for the words that would shape their next move. He breathed deeply, feeling the warp shift like a restless beast beneath the surface of reality. The creature that had landed on Vordran IX held no soul tether, no emotional resonance, no psychic noise. It was a void, a blank wound in the fabric of fate. Such anomalies rarely appeared without purpose. The demagogue rose slowly, joints cracking like brittle twigs. His voice was calm, layered with a certainty that made his followers lean closer. He spoke of an intruder not born of the warp, yet carrying violence that resonated with Khorne himself. He described motion he had glimpsed through fractured psychic sight, the path of a creature driven by instinct rather than prophecy, something strong enough to weather the storm's edge without being consumed, something that did not bow to chaos or order. One of the acolytes trembled, imagining a new demon prince arriving to claim their world, but the demagogue silenced such hopes with a raised hand. This being was not of chaos. It was an open wound, a force that refused categorization, a tool waiting for a hand to wield it, and if they could not claim it, they could at least steer it toward imperial blood. He commanded the cult to prepare offerings, to gather the strongest among them, to sharpen their blades in ready chance that bent the edge of sanity. They would test this creature, push it, provoke it, understanding it through the language of pain and death. If it proved receptive, they would lead it to their true master, a chaos warlord who sought new engines of destruction for the coming uprising. Throughout the wasteland, other cults felt the ripple as well. Psychic tides rose unbidden, dreams grew restless, and mutations surged in bodies too weak to control them. Demon hosts whispered from behind thin veils, urging their mortal vessels to seek out the anomaly. The warp was uneasy, disturbed by something that refused to mirror its nature. A fractured psyker, veins glowing faintly with warp fire, attempted to reach further across the plains, searching for the creature's essence. His vision spiraled into black static, the absence of psychic imprint overwhelming his fragile mind. He collapsed in convulsions, gasping through blood and cracked teeth as he tried to describe the emptiness he had touched. No soul, no light, no darkness, only purpose, raw, emotionless, and unyielding. The demagogue absorbed the message with steady calm. He felt no fear, only fascination. Even the warp itself recoiled from this thing, and anything that could unsettle the realm of gods deserved attention. Chaos thrived on unpredictability, and this creature was the purest form of that principle, a threat to some, a promise to others. He raised his voice once more, calling his followers to arms. They moved with frantic devotion, gripping rusted weapons, fastening armor scavenged from graves and battlefields. Their chants rose in discordant unison, pleading for favor, for vision, for strength enough to confront what approached. The demagogue watched the distant haze above the hive, sensing movement within it. A slow pulse echoed through the warp, marking each step of the creature's advance. Chaos had taken notice, and the cults of Vordran IX prepared to greet their new visitor. Whether as ally, enemy, or sacrificial offering, they would meet it with bloodshed, for bloodshed was the only language they fully understood. and the wasteland seemed to tremble with anticipation, waiting for the clash of forces that would decide the fate of the world. The wounded plains stretched endlessly beneath a sky woven from industrial smoke and fading warp light. Winds swept low across the ground, carrying flecks of ash that clung to twisted pipelines and shattered concrete. Each gust made the metallic debris sing with hollow tones, as if the wasteland voiced its exhaustion through rusted throats. Into this desolate expanse moved a singular shape, dark and imposing, cutting a silent path across the ruins of forgotten wars. Nemesis advanced with steady rhythm, each step sinking slightly into the fractured soil. Nothing in his posture hinted at confusion, though this world bore no resemblance to the one he had been created to hunt within. His directives pulsed dimly within his mutated mind, embedded deep in the folds of engineered muscle and nerve. Target acquisition, threat prioritization, elimination protocols. These were constants, and constants were enough. The absence of familiar enemies did not weaken the drive. The hunger to pursue remained. The air tasted different here, thick with chemical tang rather than viral rot. Factories loomed like skeletal giants, their shadows stretching across the ground, their furnaces cold or flickering with unstable flame. Nemesis passed beneath their broken frameworks without pause, ducking under dangling beams with motion both heavy and precise. Every distant sound triggered micro-adjustments in his stance. A grinding cogwheel, a distant explosion, the faint rattle of armored vehicles far ahead, each one drew a subtle shift in attention. His breathing apparatus hissed in intervals, forcing polluted atmosphere into lungs that no longer required oxygen in any conventional sense. The tubes along his back pulsed with regulated pressure, their rhythm steady as a war drum marking time. He scanned the horizon continuously, head tilting with the eerie softness of a predator listening for movement in underbrush. Threats lived in sound before sight. His nature understood this instinctively. Stray creatures scuttled away from him, fleeing into the cracks between broken structures. Mutated rodents whose bodies strained against the ambient corruption, packs of feral canids shaped by chemical runoff, winged pests that carried microscopic warp parasites. All sensed something wrong in the towering figure that walked without fear or hesitation. There was no scent of life on him, no heartbeat to interpret, no aura to categorize. Their instincts recoiled, understanding on a primitive level that he was not prey, not competition, not kin. He was something else entirely. Nemesis paused near a collapsed rail station, scanning the skeletal remains of the infrastructure. Twisted tracks curled upward like dying serpents, and abandoned cargo crates lay scattered across the platform. The faint heat signatures of corpses lingered beneath the rubble, cooling rapidly. His gaze remained fixed for a moment longer than necessary, as if analyzing the aftermath. His programming recognized patterns of battle. He recognized the signs of conflict, even on unfamiliar worlds. He moved on, stepping over rubble with crushing force. Each impact shook loose fragments from the overhead structure, sending small cascades of debris clinking behind him. His body absorbed the terrain effortlessly, massive legs adapting to uneven surfaces with uncanny control. Not once did he pause from fatigue or uncertainty. Direction did not matter. Movement did. In the distance, Hive Bastion Orlia rose like a monument to survival, its silhouette flickering through waves of heat and distorted warp residue. Nemesis felt the vibrations emanating from its heart, subtle tremors carried through the ground, each one marking concentrations of life, machinery, and weaponry. His attention sharpened. The hive pulsed with activity, with danger, with opportunity. A dull roar echoed across the plains, the signature blast of a vehicle engine pushed beyond safe limits. Nemesis turned, tracking the sound with predatory precision. His body pivoted slowly, controlled, each muscle tightening with silent readiness. He sensed motion. He sensed threat. Something in him stirred, an echo of the directive that had once guided every movement. The world around him blurred into a single concept, a target field waiting to be catalogued. The wasteland stretched onward, but his focus narrowed onto the direction of the sound. Without conscious decision, his feet shifted, adjusting his path toward the source. The plains welcomed his advance with uneasy silence, the wind quieting momentarily, as if watching the relentless figure carve his way toward whatever fate this world offered. Nemesis pressed forward, drawn not by curiosity or fear, but by the unwavering instinct to hunt. And with each step, Vordran IX felt the pressure of a new presence weaving itself into the fabric of its war. The broken manufactorum that lay ahead shimmered with faint red light as fires burned low within its twisted interior. Its vast metal skeleton creaked with the stress of long-abandoned machinery, and the air around it pulsed faintly with the residue of unclean rituals. Symbols carved in jagged strokes lined the remaining walls, each mark a prayer to powers that fed on ruin and frenzy. This place belonged to chaos now, a nest of corruption where faith and madness flowed freely through the shadows. As Nemesis approached, the cultists within sensed movement through the cracks in the metal plates. Their leader, a gaunt figure whose robes were stiff with dried blood, felt a ripple of unease in the warp. He drew in a slow breath, letting the sensation settle across his weary, corrupted mind. A presence approached, but not one shaped by warp essence. No familiar psychic echo accompanied it, no aura of devotion or hatred. There was only silence, a silence so deep it felt wrong. He raised a hand, signaling his followers to ready themselves. They emerged from hiding places scattered among the ruins, each one twisted by mutation or ritual branding. They clutched makeshift weapons, blades carved from scrap metal, las pistols taken from fallen guardsmen, relics stolen from forgotten shrines. Their eyes glistened with the fervor of those eager to spill blood for their dark patrons. Nemesis stepped into the manufactorum's outer bounds without slowing. His heavy boots crunched over scattered bones and broken glass, echoing through the hollow structure. The cultists saw him clearly now, towering, monstrous, stitched together from sinew and malice. His breathing apparatus hissed in steady intervals, the sound carrying through the air like the exhalation of a dormant engine waking from slumber. For a moment, even the most devoted hesitated. This was no imperial soldier, no mutant, no demonic emissary. It was something else entirely. The silence broke when the first cultist charged, screaming a war prayer as he swung a serrated blade toward the creature. The strike never landed. Nemesis moved with a speed that defied his size, one massive arm snapping forward. The impact sent the attacker collapsing into a heap, limbs folding beneath the force as if made of brittle twigs. The other cultists reacted with frenzied devotion, surging forward in a chaotic wave of bodies and blades. They swarmed him from all sides, stabbing, slashing, clawing with desperation and zeal. Their blades scraped against his skin, drawing shallow wounds that healed even as they were inflicted. Blood spattered the ground in brief arcs before drying into dark streaks across the metal. Nemesis did not flinch. His arms swung in a brutal sweep, sending bodies flying into metal walls where bones shattered on impact. A tentacle erupted from his mutated forearm with a wet, ripping sound, extending outward in a blur. It pierced a cultist through the torso, lifting him from the ground before retracting with cold efficiency. Others rushed in, driven by fear of failure as much as devotion. Lasfer scattered across Nemesis's body, the bolt sizzling against his flesh without slowing his advance. He reached into the cluster of attackers, fingers curling around a skull before crushing it with effortless finality. Despite the slaughter, some cultists continued to chant, believing their combined will might summon aid. They formed a circle, raising their voices in warped harmony. Their chants created a thin veil of warp energy above them, a ripple of crimson light that shimmered with unstable potential. Nemesis turned toward them, sensing the new energy. He moved through the battlefield like a living battering ram, striking down the last of the attackers before reaching the chanting circle. Their ritual faltered as he closed in. One shouted an invocation, another raised a ritual dagger, but the creature moved too quickly. His fist drove into the circle's heart, scattering bodies and shattering the fragile warp veil before it could solidify. The Manufactorum fell silent once more, save for the crackling of dying fires. Nemesis surveyed the carnage with no visible reaction, his posture unchanged. The presence of the cult still lingered in the air, but there were no more threats. His breathing tubes hissed steadily, marking time in the aftermath. He stepped forward again, pushing deeper into the ruins without hesitation. The wasteland behind him held its breath, while ahead, new vibrations grew faintly in the distance. More movement, more life, more targets. The hunt continued, and Vordran IX braced itself for the violence that followed in his wake. Far above the Manufactorum ruins, inside a weathered Vox observation tower built into the spine of Hive Aurelia, the machine spirits whispered warnings through trembling conduits. Cogitator screens sputtered with bursts of grainy imagery captured by half-malfunctioning Auspex drones, each frame jittering under the lingering afterglow of the warp storm. Tech Priest Mendax 44 hovered over the feeds, mechadendrites twitching with agitation as he cycled through corrupted streams in search of clarity. His organic eye blinked slowly, while the augmetic one word as it magnified, analyzed, and catalogued every flicker. For hours he had attempted to coax obedience from the wounded machine spirits, offering ritual chants and sacred oils, yet the data continued to arrive fractured and unstable. Only when the drones passed near the Manufactorum did an unexpected stability settle across the visual feeds, as though something there imposed order upon the chaos. Mendax leaned closer, curiosity sharpening his usually monotonous thoughts. He began isolating the imagery, drawing it onto a larger display that glowed with pale green light across his metal-plated features. The image formed slowly, stabilizing enough to reveal shapes moving through firelit haze. Bodies lay scattered across the ground, their twisted limbs marking the end of frenzied combat. Amid the carnage, a towering figure advanced with unsettling stillness, every motion efficient, every strike lethal. Mendax increased magnification with a sharp click of internal gearwork. The creature's flesh had been reforged into something unnatural, stitches holding mutated muscle together, while tubes pulsed like veins grafted from machinery. It carried no recognizable augment pattern, no purity seals, no warp distortion. A perfect biological heresy. His mechadendrites tightened in reflexive unease. He had spent decades cataloging forbidden anomalies, yet even his vast data archives held no reference to a creation like this. Not Xenos, not demon, not any imperial bioform. Its regenerative capabilities surpassed the tyrannid strains he had once studied. Its musculature density rivaled that of Ogrins, yet moved with the precision of an Assassinarum construct. Most disturbing was its psychic presence, or rather, its complete absence. Mendax paused the feed on a close frame, staring into the creature's exposed eye, pale and unblinking. No warp signature emanated from it. No emotional trace drifted across the ether, not even a faint residue of soul. The absence felt wrong, like an equation missing its final symbol. A being with no warp reflection should have been lifeless, yet this entity moved with terrifying purpose. Officers in the tower murmured behind him, unsure how to interpret the spectacle. They saw only a monster tearing through cultists, yet Mendax saw something deeper, something far more troubling. His voice murmured through his vocoder, mechanical yet edged with the faintest note of awe. A weapon of incredible design, stripped of all psychic resonance, engineered solely for destruction. But engineered by whom? He replayed a segment showing the creature shrug off Lasfire, the wounds sealing moments after impact. He slowed another segment, observing the tentacle emerging from implanted flesh with smooth precision. Each mutation displayed intentional construction, not chaotic corruption. This was not evolution. This was purpose. A junior adept approached nervously, delivering new readings gathered from Auspex sweeps around the Manufactorum. high-density biological mass, anomalous cellular regeneration, faint traces of engineered viral compounds. Mendax absorbed the numbers, assembling patterns in his mind. The data formed a shape that defied categorization, an unsanctioned bioengineered juggernaut. He transmitted a soft prayer to calm the machine's spirits before shifting the display toward the hive's central command link. The creature was moving toward Aurelia, step after step, an inevitable advance. Mendax's conclusion settled into place with the weight of absolute certainty. This was not a stray monstrosity. This was an apex construct, a hunter forged without regard for imperial doctrine or chaos corruption. As the tech priest sent his findings to Colonel Harvek, his final analysis echoed through the Vox like a mechanical whisper. A threat beyond classification, a weapon walking without a master. And with each distant footstep captured on Auspex, Vordran IX edged closer to a fate its archives had no protocols to address. The screens flickered again, stabilizing just long enough to show Nemesis lifting his head toward the hive. Mendax's optical gears tightened. The creature had sensed them, and it was coming. Colonel Harvek stood beneath the vaulted ceiling of the command bunker, its reinforced plates humming with the dull heartbeat of an overworked power grid. The hollow table before him showed a shifting marker pulsing red, marking the anomaly's steady approach across the wasteland. Every few moments, new Auspex readings fed into the display, trying and failing to categorize the entity they now understood to be far worse than an average xenoform. Officers gathered around him in tense silence, their expressions carved into grim masks as they waited for instruction. The atmosphere felt heavier than usual, as though the bunker itself sensed the gravity of what pressed toward it. Harvek exhaled slowly, letting the stale, recycled air settle in his lungs before speaking. The Auspex team reported the creature's acceleration, steady, unbroken. Reports from Mendax 44 confirmed regenerative properties and classified the being as a mobile extinction threat. Harvek listened, absorbing every detail with the stoicism of someone preparing for the inevitable. The guard had faced horrors before, but this was different. This was something beyond doctrine, beyond the combat logs drilled into every recruit. Harvek moved away from the table and approached the viewport that overlooked the arming bays below. Dozens of stormtroopers assembled in disciplined lines, armor gleaming under harsh white lighting, visors reflecting determination sharpened by fear. Specialists prepared meltaguns, plasma rifles, and containment gear ordinarily reserved for rogue psychers or tyrannid organisms. Even so, the colonel knew their readiness might not be enough. He turned to his officers, voice steady and deliberate. The anomaly is approaching the hive. We cannot allow it to enter populated sectors. It must be stopped before it reaches the gates. The words came heavy, yet resolute. The guard obeyed out of duty, and duty left no room for uncertainty. A communications officer stepped forward, asking whether evacuation protocols should begin. Harvek's jaw tightened. The hive held millions. Evacuation was a fantasy. Defense was the only reality they could afford. He issued the containment directive with the calm of someone who had long ago learned to bury hesitation. Deploy the 9th Aurelian Stormtrooper Company. Full containment gear. Heavy weapons authorization. Target designation NEM00. No capture priority unless feasible. Neutralization preferred. The room shifted into controlled chaos as officers activated their command links, relaying orders through encrypted Vox channels. Sirens echoed through the lower corridors, their rising pitch sending tremors through the structure. In the arming bays below, stormtroopers moved with icy precision, loading crates, locking helmets, and reciting combat litanies under their breath. Harvek returned to the hollow table just as the red marker shifted again. The creature altered course slightly, adjusting its path with unnatural awareness. It was not wandering. It was seeking something, drawn by signals the guard could not sense. Mendax 44 final transmission reached the bunker, laced with binary static. The tech priest addressed Harvek directly, advising extreme caution. He described the creature as a being built for perfect pursuit, driven by embedded directives rather than emotion or instinct. It hunted without malice, without hesitation, without fatigue, a machine made of flesh. Harvek absorbed the message, feeling the bunker vibrate as the stormtrooper transports prepared for deployment. The decision had been made. The guard would face this thing head-on, not because they believed victory was certain, but because their world demanded that they stand between its people and whatever terror walked toward them. He issued one final order, voice low but unwavering. All units prepare for engagement. The anomaly will reach the outer sectors within the hour. Vordran IX does not fall today. He closed the Vox link, allowing the weight of his choice to settle. The guard moved with renewed purpose, driven by the resolve of their commander. Yet beneath that resolve, an undercurrent of dread lingered. They were preparing to confront a creature that defied nature and refused to die. And as the red marker pulsed closer on the hollow table, Harvek knew the true test of Vordran IX's strength had begun. The outskirts of Hive Oralia rose like jagged metal teeth, their edges rusted from centuries of exposure to industrial winds and corrosive runoff. Nemesis approached the colossal walls with unbroken stride, moving through drifting ash that clung to his skin and left streaks along the stitched leather covering his form. The hive towered above him like a monument to faded strength, its lower sectors dimly lit by failing lumens that flickered erratically through the smog. Massive gates sealed the hive's entrance, yet dozens of ventilation ducts, fractured pipelines, and collapsed loading platforms opened pathways into its lower depths. Nemesis paused, scanning the structure with predatory awareness. The hive vibrated with life, millions of heartbeats, footsteps, and mechanical rhythms blending into a faint pulse that resonated through the steel. It drew him forward like a distant echo of purpose. He entered through a collapsed transit tunnel, stepping over fallen girders and shattered concrete slabs. The tunnel walls bore scorch marks from recent skirmishes, graffiti scrawled in heretical symbols, and the dried remnants of blood splatter. Broken servitors lay discarded along the path, their bodies half dismantled by scavengers searching for parts. Nemesis barely glanced at them as he advanced deeper into the hive. The lower levels buzzed with activity. Civilians haunted the shadows, their eyes sunken from exhaustion and fear. They moved in tight clusters, wrapped in threadbare clothing, their faces hidden by cracked visors or worn rebreathers. The moment Nemesis stepped into view, their movement stilled. Sound dropped away. Conversations died mid-sentence. Mothers pulled children behind them. Vendors abandoned their makeshift stalls. They did not scream, for fear had already stolen their voices. Nemesis did not react. He did not slow or change course. He moved with the mechanical certainty of a creature built only for pursuit. Civilians scattered as he passed, some falling to their knees, others pressing themselves flat against the walls, praying under trembling breath. Rumors of demons and mutants had long haunted these sectors, but nothing matched the quiet dread that walked among them now. Further ahead, clusters of underhive gangers watched from elevated platforms. Their armor was cobbled together from scrap metal, their weapons a mismatched assortment of las pistols, blades, and pipe shotguns. They eyed Nemesis with a mixture of curiosity and territorial aggression. When he entered their domain without hesitation, the gangers felt their pride flare. A few stepped forward, leveling their weapons in an attempt to assert control. The first shot struck Nemesis's chest. The bolt sizzled against flesh, scorching the skin but leaving no wound of consequence. The creature turned its head with slow deliberation, locking its pale eye onto the attackers above. The gangers froze, breath caught in their throats as they realized they had gained his attention. Nemesis moved. He leaped upward with unnatural power, seizing the platform edge and pulling himself onto it in a single fluid motion. The gangers scattered, firing wildly in a panic that dissolved their earlier bravado. He swept through them with devastating precision, striking bodies aside as though clearing debris from his path. one attempted to flee down a narrow passage. Nemesis's tentacle shot forward, impaling the ganger before dragging the lifeless corpse back into the open. The remainder of the gang fled into the shadows, abandoning their territory rather than face the unstoppable force they had provoked. Nemesis stood amid the carnage, breath hissing softly as he resumed his focus. The hive's deeper vibrations called to him, pulling him inward, guiding his direction with frequencies only he seemed to recognize. He pressed onward, stepping over broken weapons and discarded bodies, moving through corridors that stank of oil, sweat, and fear. The hive opened before him in an expanding labyrinth of metal and decay, and with each echoing step he took, Vordran IX's lower sectors whispered a silent truth. A new terror walked among them, and it did not come from the warp. Deep within the lower hive, the air thickened with the metallic tang of anticipation as the 9th Aurelian Stormtrooper Company executed their deployment orders. They moved with the polished precision of elite soldiers, armor sealed, visors dimly glowing in the shadows. The ambush site had been chosen carefully, a narrow transit corridor reinforced with old rockcrete walls, its ceiling low enough to limit the movements of large entities. Meltaguns were positioned at the flanks, hellguns readied, and plasma charges embedded within the debris to seal exits if needed. Colonel Harveck's voice filtered through their comms, steady and firm. Engagement authorization confirmed. Target approaching outer checkpoint. Maintain formation. The squad leaders exchanged glances, each one steeling themselves for an encounter none of them fully understood. The corridor fell into silence as the lights flickered overhead. The faint hum of the hive's machinery seemed distant, replaced by an unnatural stillness that crept toward them through the passageway. A soft vibration touched the floor, subtle at first, then growing with each passing moment. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the metal, steady and deliberate. Nemesis emerged from the darkness, his immense form filling the corridor with suffocating presence. His skin glistened under flickering lumens, stitched flesh stretching over mutated muscle. The respirator tubes hissed with rhythmic pressure, the sound carrying across the space like the breathing of a dormant beast stirring from slumber. The stormtroopers acted in flawless synchronicity. Meltaguns fired first, their concentrated heat turning air into shimmering waves and splashing molten fury across Nemesis's torso. The blast struck with enough force to liquefy ceramite, sending bursts of steam exploding outward. He staggered slightly, skin blistering and peeling away, yet his advance did not falter. Scorched flesh knit back together with slow, relentless determination. Hellgun volleys followed, streaks of bright energy striking in tight formation patterns meant to overwhelm even Astartes' armor. Each bolt hissed into Nemesis's body, leaving seared marks that faded almost as soon as they appeared. The stormtroopers pressed forward, shifting their formation to maintain optimal angles. Their discipline never wavered, but fear crackled beneath their helmets as they realized their weapons barely slowed the creature. Nemesis accelerated with sudden, terrifying force. He surged through the corridor, smashing into the first line of soldiers. Bodies were hurled aside like ragdolls, armor denting under the crushing power of his strikes. One stormtrooper raised his weapon at point-blank range, firing a desperate plasma shot into Nemesis's jaw. The creature's head snapped back, flesh melting across its face. Yet the wound regenerated as he lifted the soldier off the ground and flung him against the wall with bone-shattering impact. The squad attempted to trigger the embedded charges, but Nemesis closed the distance too quickly. Tentacles burst from his forearm, lashing outward with brutal accuracy. They impaled two soldiers, dragging them into his grasp where he crushed them without hesitation. The corridor erupted into chaos as the remaining stormtroopers regrouped, trying to form a defensive perimeter. A sergeant barked orders, his voice cracking through the comms as he rallied the survivors. Plasma teams, advance, Meltaguns fallback. Containment Protocol 9. They obeyed instantly, firing into the creature with everything they had left. The corridor glowed with the heat of sustained plasma fire, the walls trembling under the force. Nemesis absorbed the assault like a force of nature. His chest smoked, blackened, yet his posture remained unbroken. He moved with brutal efficiency, seizing another trooper by the arm and smashing him into his comrades. A final tentacle strike pierced a meltagunner, ending the ambush's last coordinated action. Silence draped the corridor once more. Nemesis stood amid the broken bodies, breath hissing through damaged tubes that repaired themselves with unsettling ease. His gaze shifted down the corridor, locking onto the faint vibrations of new life signs deeper within the hive. He stepped over the fallen, leaving the ruins of the Ninth Aurelian Company behind. The ambush had failed, and the hive's defenders realized that what walked through their corridors could not be stopped with conventional force. The command bunker trembled as distant shockwaves rolled through the hive's foundations, dust falling from ceiling seams like dry ash. Colonel Harvick stood before the hollow table once more, eyes fixed on the fading telemetry feeds from the stormtrooper ambush. One by one, the life sign indicators blinked out, their soft tones falling silent until only a field of dim markers remained. The last survivor's feed wavered, camera shaking violently before collapsing into static. Then nothing. Harvick exhaled through clenched teeth, a rare crack in his otherwise impenetrable calm. He had expected casualties, but he had not expected annihilation. The Ninth Aurelian Stormtrooper Company was among his finest, trained for encounters that shattered lesser regiments. To lose them without inflicting measurable damage on the target forced a shift in perspective he had hoped never to confront. Tech Priest Mendax 44 appeared beside him, mechadendrites curling in muted agitation. His vocoder crackled as he delivered new readings extracted from the ambush site's sensors. Regeneration beyond predicted limits, cellular repair at exponential rates, resistance to plasma-level heat, and adaptive musculature. Mendax paused before adding the final observation. No psychic trace detected, no warp resonance, no data signature that aligns with known classifications. Harvick absorbed the words, eyes narrowing at the implications. A creature immune to warp influence, untouched by demonic corruption, yet utterly destructive, powerful enough to walk through a stormtrooper firing line, controlled enough to kill with precision rather than blind rage. He recognized the danger, not only in the creature's raw strength, but in its intent. It did not slaughter aimlessly. It moved with purpose, following vibrations and life signs through the hive as though navigating an invisible map. An officer approached with trembling urgency, delivering reports of civilian panic in the lower sectors. Rumors spread rapidly, stories of a monstrous figure walking through corridors without pause, striking down gangers and cultists alike. Fear took hold, rippling through the densely packed underhive. Harvick knew that panic could fracture a hive faster than any enemy incursion. He raised a hand to silence the officer, turning his focus back to the hollow table. The red marker representing the anomaly moved deeper into the hive at steady pace. It did not deviate. It did not slow. It cut through the map like a scalpel toward the hive's inner arteries. Harvick's voice emerged low and firm as he activated a secure Vox link to higher command, priority code transmission, requesting immediate inquisitorial intervention, threat class escalation to Omega-level bioanomaly. Request acknowledged, came the distant reply, each word edged with bureaucratic detachment. Inquisitorial agent en route. Maintain containment where possible. Harvick ended the transmission, knowing that summoning the Inquisition could condemn him if his actions were found wanting. Yet he no longer cared. The hive faced something beyond military protocol. This demanded a higher authority, one accustomed to confronting the impossible. He turned to Mendax 44, who monitored shifting sensor patterns with mechanical intensity. "You believe this creature is engineered," Harvick stated, his voice devoid of disbelief. "Not spawned, not mutated, created." Mendax emitted a soft burst of binary affirmation. Its design is intentional. Each mutation serves a singular directive: pursuit. The colonel's gaze hardened, a weapon without allegiance, unleashed in the heart of his world. If chaos discovered how to direct it, if the hive's enemies learned to manipulate its instinct, the consequences would unravel the sector. The creature had no soul for the warp to grasp, yet its physical might alone threatened catastrophe. Harvek straightened his uniform, shoulders squared with renewed resolve. He issued fresh orders across the Vox, commanding all available regiments to fortify defensive lines deeper in the hive. Evacuation routes were reprioritized for vital personnel, and above all, civilians were to be kept away from the anomaly's projected path. As he studied the pulsing red marker advancing through the map, a grim weight settled over him. This was not a foe to defeat, but a storm to endure, and Vordran IX had already suffered too many storms. Harvek closed his eyes briefly, allowing the tension to settle into his bones before lifting his head again. The war had changed, and so had his role. The hive commander stood firm, ready to face whatever came next, even as the unrelenting footsteps of Nemesis carried him closer to the world's fragile heart. In the broken mid-levels of Hive Aurelia, where abandoned manufactorums hung over chasms of forgotten machinery, the servants of chaos sensed their moment. The presence of the anomaly, the silent monster cutting a path through cult and ganger alike, had sent ripples through their scattered cells. Some took it as a warning. Others, driven by fevered devotion, saw only opportunity. In the depths of a defiled assembly hall, they gathered to shape that opportunity into something far more terrible. Once the hall had echoed with the rhythmic clatter of conveyor lines and the steady hum of production. Now its machines were still, their belts sagging like dead tongues. Rust and blood coated the floors in layered stains, the remnants of sacrifices offered in whispered homage to the war god whose name no loyal citizen dared speak. Candles carved from rendered fat flickered in the gloom, their flames bending strangely in the stagnant air, as if listening to a voice only they could hear. At the center of the hall, a wide circle had been etched into the rockcrete, lines carved deep and filled with a mixture of oil and spilled lifeblood. Skulls, polished and painted with crude symbols, formed its outer ring. Within that circle, a dozen robed figures knelt, chanting in low, rasping tones. Their voices wove together, the cadence rising and falling like a tide, calling across the veil for a presence that knew only violence. The demagogue who led them stood at the circle's edge, a knife in one hand, a bone talisman in the other. His eyes burned with a fanatic light as he raised his arms toward the ceiling, where twisted support beams framed a patch of damp, shadowed stone. He felt the air grow heavy around him, pressing against his skin in slow waves. The warp was listening. It tasted the blood already spilled, the hatred simmering in every breath, the ambition that sought to twist the intruding monster into a tool. His thoughts returned to the anomaly moving through the hive, a weapon without soul, immune to the warp's whisper. A thing like that, he believed, could be aimed if enough terror and carnage were unleashed, if the right symbol of power tore open reality itself in its presence. So he called out for a champion of Khorne, a greater predator to answer the challenge of this soulless hunter. Around him, the cultists' bodies shook as the temperature dropped, breath drifting from their lips in faint white streams despite the heat of the candles. Blood on the floor began to move, crawling along the etched lines of the circle as though drawn by some unseen magnet. It gathered in the center, swirling slowly, thickening into an unnatural pattern that refused to obey gravity. The demagogue felt his heart pounding faster, not from fear but from awe. The walls of the hall trembled. Old chains swung from the ceiling, clinking softly as if stirred by a distant storm. The industrial hall became a focus point, a wound opening within the hive. The demagogue pressed the knife to his palm, pressing down until blood welled up and dripped into the circle. Each drop sent a faint pulse of crimson light through the gathered fluid. He knew the ritual was dangerous. Summoning was never guaranteed. The warp was fickle, its denizens inclined to mock or destroy those who called with insufficient conviction. But the presence already stalking the hive gave this ritual weight. The warp hungered for spectacle, for confrontation, for the clash of monstrous wills. The demagogue promised all of that in his prayer. As the chanting reached a fevered pitch, the air thickened further, pressing against lungs, slowing motions, bending sound. Some cultists began to cough blood, their bodies not built to withstand extended contact with raw warp seepage. Still they chanted, voices cracking but unbroken, their devotion smeared across the hall like another coat of invisible blood. Deep in that distorted air, something stirred in response. The demagogue felt it as a pressure behind his eyes, a presence pressing down, testing the strength of the gateway. He spread his arms wider, inviting it in, offering the hive as a battlefield, the anomaly as a rival trophy. The hall vibrated with the first faint pulse of something far greater, a prelude to arrival. Reality thinned around the summoning circle, and the warp's hungry attention settled fully on Vordran IX. The stage was nearly set, and somewhere beyond the hive walls, the walking weapon moved closer, drawn by currents it did not yet understand. Through the lower hive's choking corridors, Nemesis advanced with the steady inevitability of a closing fist. Every step reverberated through metal walkways and hollow ducts, each vibration carried along pipes and support beams like a warning. He followed those vibrations in turn, guided by the dense clusters of heartbeats, the subtle harmonics of chanting voices, the fluctuations of heat behind walls of steel and stone. The deeper he moved, the thicker the air became. It was not merely pollution that slowed it, but something heavier, less tangible. The pressure of the warp seeped into the atmosphere, warping the edges of sound and light. Dim lumens flickered in strange patterns, forming shapes that dissolved when focused upon. Nemesis did not pause. His breathing apparatus continued its relentless cycle, forcing corrupted air through a system unconcerned with spiritual contamination. As he descended a flight of cracked stairs into an old assembly sector, the distant sound of chanting reached him, a low, rhythmic pulse. His head tilted slightly, eye narrowing in brief calculation. The cadence suggested organization, ritual, gathering, targets. He turned toward the sound without conscious thought, his mutated muscles shifting smoothly as he passed through a partially sealed archway. The hall erupted into view, a cathedral of industrial ruins stretching out before him. Candles carved from unnatural fat cast wavering light across blood-slick floors. Hooded figures knelt in concentric circles around a central pattern etched into the rockcrete, their chants growing louder with each passing moment. The air above the circle shimmered, thickening like oil heated beyond boiling point, veined with faint streaks of red. Nemesis stepped into the threshold, his shadow spilling across the nearest cultists. Some faltered mid-chant, spines stiffening as they sensed his presence. Others, too consumed by devotion, continued, unaware that their moment of triumph had been invaded by something that did not belong to their script. His gaze locked onto the center of the ritual. Blood pooled and twisted in defiance of gravity, forming a swirling vortex that pulsed in time with the cult's collective breath. The warp pressed heavily there, trying to force its way through. Nemesis recognized none of this, yet something in the scene resonated with an older memory. A lab bathed in sick light, scientists murmuring, instruments humming, a subject suspended at the heart of their experiment. An objective, a focal point, something to disrupt. He advanced without warning, heavy footsteps scattering the uneasy quiet that had hovered over the ritual. The demagogue spun to face him, eyes wide as he beheld the intruder. For a heartbeat, their gazes met. The cult leader saw no faith, no doubt, no fear in that exposed eye, only raw function, a void where a soul should have been. His voice faltered, chant breaking apart as his mind scrambled to interpret this violation of his ritual. The warp reacted first. The unstable energy in the circle surged, flaring outward in ripples that distorted the air around Nemesis. Flickers of crimson light danced across his skin, testing for purchase, searching for entry. They found nothing to grip, no psychic anchor, no spiritual thread. The force washed over him like smoke against stone and dissipated, leaving only the echo of its frustration. Nemesis stepped into the circle. Candles toppled, their flames snuffed out under his crushing footsteps. His massive arm swung outward, connecting with two robed figures at once and sending them hurtling across the hall. Their bodies collided with rusted machinery, bones cracking audibly before they fell limp. Other cultists screamed protests, some in rage, some in terror, but few dared to rush him. He focused on the heart of the pattern. The swirling blood strained toward cohesion, struggling to maintain its shape as the ritual faltered. Nemesis drove his heel down into its center. The impact sent a shockwave through the fluid, scattering it in a violent burst. The warp-slick mixture sprayed outward, spattering robes and stone, severing the fragile link that had been forming. The hall shook, a distorted roar erupted from the half-formed breach, not in triumph but in anger at being denied. Reality snapped back into tighter shape, rejecting the incomplete incursion. Cultists clutched their heads as the pressure in the air shifted abruptly, leaving behind the heavy stillness of a failed summoning. Nemesis turned toward the nearest cluster of robed figures as they scrambled to regroup. His breathing hissed quietly, a metronome of dread in the stunned quiet. The ritual had been interrupted, not by design or counterprayer, but by the simple presence of a weapon that did not recognize or respect the boundaries between worlds. The warp's attention lingered, offended, intrigued, and in that charged pause, the next threat began to force its way through, unwilling to be denied so easily. The ruined hall's walls vibrated as reality strained under the weight of frustrated hunger. The failed summoning had torn a ragged opening in the veil, not wide enough to fully birth the intended champion, but more than sufficient for lesser things to slip through. The air thickened, sinking into lungs like wet cloth, and shadows deepened without any change in the dim, flickering light. The surviving cultists scrambled back from the shattered circle, their chants devolving into panicked mutters. Some crawled on hands and knees, leaving streaks in the spilled blood as they tried to retreat into the corners of the hall. Others pressed themselves to the walls, torn between terror at the intruder and awe at the warp's growing presence. The demagogue struggled to rise, visions swimming, ears ringing with the distant thunder of something clawing its way closer. At the circle's center, the scattered blood began to move again. This time, it did not spiral in graceful patterns. It crawled, dragging itself along the etched lines, gathering in thick clumps that pulsed with dark heat. Each pulse was accompanied by a growing hum, a vibration that rattled loose bolts and fluttered ragged banners on the walls. The warp did not accept interference lightly. It pushed back. The air ahead of Nemesis rippled like disturbed water. The stone floor beneath the circle bulged again, then split open with a jagged crack. From that jagged seam, shapes emerged, half-formed at first, then solidifying with each heartbeat. Crimson flesh, brass armor, horns that curved like blades, eyes burning with unfocused rage. Lesser demons, bloodletters of corn, forced their way through the ragged hole in reality. They rose one by one, clawed feet smearing the blood that had called them, brass blades gripped in hands that radiated mindless violence. Their bodies radiated heat, warping the air around them, sending waves of dry heat through the hall. Each breath they took came out as a low growl, vibrating with the promise of killing. They looked around with predatory alertness, assessing the scene with an instinct sharpened by endless slaughter. Their gaze fell on Nemesis almost as one, drawn to the only figure in the hall that did not cower or kneel. They tasted the world through warped senses, questing for fear, anger, frailty, and found something strange. No soul, no emotional resonance, no connection to the immaterium. Yet this being stood, alive and solid, a towering mass of potential violence. The bloodletters reacted as they had been made to react. They bared jagged teeth and advanced, seeing in Nemesis not an absence, but a challenge. Their blades scraped against the stone as they moved, leaving trails of sparks. The nearest cultists scurried away, eager not to stand between their summoned patrons and this strange intruder. Nemesis watched them approach. His breathing remained steady, his posture unchanged. The demons left trails of burning footprints in their wake, rockcrete sizzling under each step. Their movements were fast, fluid, honed by eons of war beyond human comprehension. They covered the distance between them and their chosen enemy in heartbeats. The first bloodletter lunged. Its brass sword sliced toward Nemesis's neck, a sweeping blow backed by supernatural force. Nemesis shifted, body moving with uncanny timing. The blade glanced off his shoulder, leaving a deep cut that split skin and muscle. Blood flowed for an instant before the wound began to close, flesh knitting itself back together in defiance of the damage. His response was immediate, brutal. A massive fist connected with the demon's chest, bones and armor cracking under the impact. The creature was hurled backward, crashing into a pile of old machine parts with a shriek that echoed despite the lack of any mouth movement. Another leaped in its place, blade descending in a two-handed arc. Nemesis intercepted the strike with his forearm, the metal ringing as sword met mutated flesh. More demons closed in, forming a loose circle around him. The hall transformed into a tempest of motion, crimson bodies darting in and out, blades flashing in arcs of heated metal. Nemesis turned and struck, punched and grabbed, tentacles lashing out to impale and crush. Each demon that fell dissolved into steaming residue, its form unraveling back into the warp. Yet for each that died, more pressed forward, drawn through the still-open wound in the floor. The demagogue watched with trembling ecstasy and dread. His ritual had failed in its intended purpose, yet chaos had still answered. And now those answers collided with a foreign horror that refused to break. The battle between soulless predator and warp-born rage intensified, the hall echoing with impacts and roars. Vordran IX shuddered quietly under their combined violence, as if sensing that this clash was only a prelude to something greater. While lesser demons bled back into unreality under Nemesis's relentless assault, a different presence felt the disturbance from deeper in the hive's corrupted arteries. Karnox the Flayed, Chaos Champion of Khorne, strode through a tunnel lined with chains and flayed skin banners, each step a measured declaration of his dominion. His armor, a brutal patchwork of spiked plates and scarred ceramite, bore the marks of countless battles. Symbols of his patron god were carved into every surface, caked in dried gore that never seemed to fully fade. He had been on his way to inspect the progress of his cult's uprising when the warp roared in his mind with newfound intensity. A summoning, he understood, half-veiled but still potent, had torn open a wound in reality nearby. More intriguing, the warp carried with it a sense of frustrated fury, an impression that something outside its dominion had defied its will. Karnox welcomed fury. Fury meant conflict, and conflict fed both him and his god. He altered course without hesitation, marching toward the source of the disturbance with chain-axe in hand. The weapon hummed with barely contained hunger, its teeth caked in blackened blood. Karnox's helmeted head tilted slightly as he listened to the distant echoes of battle reverberating down the tunnel. The sounds sharpened as he drew closer, metal striking flesh, inhuman snarls, the distinctive hiss of something large breathing steadily in the heart of the chaos. He emerged into the ruined assembly hall with the practiced stride of a warrior who never expected to be the lesser presence in a room. His arrival did not go unnoticed. The remaining cultists dropped to their knees, heads bowed, trembling between reverence and terror. The surviving bloodletters glanced in his direction with brief disinterest, recognizing a servant of their god but not their target. Karnox's gaze swept across the carnage, the flickering candles, the warped blood circle now cracked and broken. Then it settled on the towering figure at the hall's center. Nemesis stood amidst a ring of dissipating demon residue, his flesh marred by fresh cuts and burns that healed even as they leaked. His exposed eye burned with cold purpose, his breathing apparatus intoned its slow, relentless rhythm. For a brief moment, the hall felt strangely quiet, as if the warp itself paused to witness the convergence. Karnak studied the intruder with growing interest. This was no imperial dog, no coward hiding behind faith, no mutant begging for favor. This was a creature that met demons head-on and survived. Its lack of warp presence unsettled him, yet also intrigued him. A force like this, he considered, might be bent toward the glory of Khorne, or failing that, might serve as a worthy offering. He stepped forward, armor plates grinding softly with each motion. His chain axe spun to life, teeth whirring as they tore at the air, eager for flesh. The demagogue watched with flushed excitement, seeing in his champion the final piece needed to reclaim the ritual's glory. The cult fell into hushed murmurs, minds struggling to reconcile the monster they had watched tear through their ranks and the warlord who now advanced to meet it. Nemesis regarded Karnox with the same unblinking stare he had given the demons. There was no recognition of rank or significance in his gaze, only the assessment of a new threat. The proximity of the Chaos Champion registered in his senses as heightened motion, enhanced armor density, increased weapon lethality. His stance shifted by a fractional measure, weight redistributing with subtle precision. The Bloodleaters moved back, forming a loose perimeter, as if acknowledging that this clash belonged to a higher tier of violence. The warp simmered with anticipation, eager to see the result of champion against anomaly. Karnox rolled his shoulders, feeling the familiar surge of battle lust rise through his veins. He embraced it fully, not as a distraction, but as a sharpened edge. His world narrowed to the figure before him, the strange soulless weapon that had challenged Chaos's claim. He advanced, each step a promise of bloodshed. The hall drew in a collective breath as predator and champion closed the distance. In that suspended moment, the shadows seemed to lean closer, and the air shivered in anticipation of the brutality about to unfold. Karnox closed the final meters with a roar that vibrated through his armor and into the walls of the ruined hall. His chain axe spun at full, murderous speed, teeth shrieking like a tortured engine, as he swung the weapon in a brutal, ascending arc aimed to tear Nemesis open from hip to shoulder. The creature met his charge head-on, planting its feet with the instinctive solidity of something built to absorb impact. The axe connected, biting deep into flesh and muscle. For a heartbeat, the blade seemed to find perfect purchase, ripping through layered tissue with savage satisfaction. Blood sprayed in a dark fan across the floor, spattering Karnox's armor and the trembling cultists nearby. Nemesis staggered under the force of the blow, his torso torn open in a jagged wound that exposed bone and pulsing organs. Any normal creature would have collapsed. Nemesis did not. His body swayed, then straightened, tubes hissing louder as if compensating. The exposed flesh began to twitch, threads of tissue reaching across the ravine in his torso, knitting themselves together with unnatural haste. The glow in his eye did not dim. Instead, it focused more sharply. He struck back, a massive fist crashed into Karnox's chest plate, the impact denting the ceramite and driving the champion back a step. Another blow followed, this time angled toward the side of the helmet. The hit rattled Karnox's vision, sparks dancing across his visual display as his internal systems struggled to recalibrate. He grinned behind the snarling mask, reveling in the pain. This was the kind of opponent he craved. He pressed forward, swinging the chain axe in a series of heavy, deliberate strikes. Each blow aimed to sever limbs, to crush bone, to carve this monstrous intruder into pieces. Nemesis moved with an economy of motion that belied his bulk, deflecting some strikes with hardened forearms, taking others directly into his body, relying on sheer durability and regeneration to sustain him. Each fresh wound regenerated slower than the last, damage accumulating like cracks in a reinforced wall. Nemesis shifted tactics. A tentacle lashed out from his arm, snapping toward Karnox's weapon hand. It wrapped around the forearm of the champion's armor, tightening with crushing force. Karnox snarled, feeling pressure closing over bone and metal. He responded by wrenching his arm sideways, chain-axe teeth grinding against the mutated limb. Flesh tore, black blood spilling, yet the tentacle held, tightening despite the shredded fibers. Nemesis pulled, dragging Karnox closer. Their bodies collided with a sound like colliding vehicles. Karnox slammed a gauntleted fist into Nemesis's jaw, snapping the head to the side. Teeth fractured, skin split, but again the damage began to mend almost immediately. Karnox recognized the pattern now. This creature could be wounded, slowed, perhaps even broken, but not easily ended. The champion drove a knee upward, slamming it into Nemesis's abdomen. The blow forced the creature back half a step, giving Karnox enough space to wrench his arm free. The tentacle tore away, leaving a shredded length of ruined flesh dangling from his gauntlet. He shook it off with a violent flick, then lunged again, chain-axe howling. Nemesis adapted. His movements became more fluid, his strikes less direct but more precise. He began targeting weak points in Karnox's armor, hammering at plates already dented by previous battles. A blow to the side of the knee caused the joint to buckle briefly. Another punch to the chest deepened the earlier dent, forcing the champion's breath to come harder. The cultists watched in stunned, horrified awe. They had seen Karnox crush loyalist champions and butcher space marines in single combat. To see him pushed, to see him strain, shook their convictions. Yet awe did not fade entirely. The spectacle itself was a form of worship. Bloodlitters hovered at the periphery, blades idle for once, as if the duel held even their attention. The warp's presence thickened, feeding on the violence, amplifying it, savoring each wound inflicted, each drop spilled. Finally, Nemesis found an opening. Karnox swung high, chain-axe carving a path toward the creature's neck. Nemesis ducked under the blow with unnatural speed for his size, stepping into the champion's guard. His hand clamped around the wrist, holding the axe, squeezing until servos whined and plating cracked. His other hand drove forward, fingers sinking into a gap between Karnox's chest plates. Ribs shattered under the crushing force. Karnox's breath hitched, systems blaring damage warnings in his helmet. He attempted one last, defiant strike with his free hand, punching Nemesis's face hard enough to twist it sideways. The creature's grip only tightened. With a final, brutal surge, Nemesis lifted the Chaos Champion off his feet and slammed him into the rockcrete floor. The impact sent a crack racing through the already damaged surface. Karnox's axe flew from his grasp, skittering across the blood-slick stone. Nemesis loomed over him, battered, burned, but unbowed. He brought his fist down once more, driving it through the weakened chest plate, into shattered bone and ruined organs. The champion's world dimmed, vision narrowing to a fading tunnel of crimson and static. The last thing Karnox saw was the single pale eye of the creature above him, unwavering, merciless, devoid of anything resembling triumph. When the life faded from the champion's body, the hall fell into a deeper silence, broken only by the faint hiss of Nemesis's breathing apparatus. The warp shivered in response to the death of one of its favored warriors, intrigued and angered in equal measure. Nemesis rose slowly, wounds still closing, standing over the broken armor and torn flesh. The cultists' faith trembled. Their champion had fallen. Their ritual lay in ruins. The stranger in stitched flesh still stood. And somewhere beyond the hive, Vordran IX's fate shifted another step toward a path no prophecy had anticipated. Far above the chaos unfolding in the assembly hall, within the iron heart of Hive Orlia's data sanctum, Tech Priest Mendax 44 stood rigidly before a bank of trembling cogitator screens. Rows of red emergency runes pulsed across the displays, each one marking seismic disturbance or anomalous biological readings, traveling in erratic patterns through the hive's lower arteries. The machine spirits trembled beneath the strain of processing such unprecedented data, their digital murmurs echoing through the sanctum like nervous prayers. Mendax's mechadendrites twitched with agitation as new information streamed from scattered Auspex drones. Their optical feeds were fracturing under warp interference, their auditory sensors choking on screams and distorted echoes from the Manufactorium district. Yet amid that chaos, a single figure remained consistently visible, a structure of mass and movement that defied expected survivability. Nemesis. The feeds flared as auxiliary sensors picked up the shockwave of the Chaos Champion's death. Metal shelving rattled. Loose tools danced across the sanctum floor. The warp-jostled cogitators struggled to interpret the magnitude of force required to pulp ceramite armor reinforced by daemonic blessing. Mendax analyzed the data in silence, his organic mind working in tandem with binary subroutines to assemble what he feared was the beginning of a new classification. On one monitor, Nemesis stood amidst dissipating demonic residue, his body riddled with deep wounds and char marks that healed like time-lapse footage of a regenerating organism. Mendax magnified the view. Internal tissue crawled across open space, weaving itself back into solid structure. Broken ribs realigned with glistening wet sounds. Torn muscle strands braided together into solid mass. Even the scorch marks etched by hell-forged blades faded beneath the methodical advance of regeneration. He cycled through archived biological data, comparing the anomaly to every known organism cataloged by the Imperium across millennia. Tyrannid regeneration was faster but less stable. Ogren musculature possessed comparable density but lacked precision control. Astartes' resilience operated through structured redundancy, not the fluid adaptability Nemesis displayed. Nothing in the Imperium's vast lexicon aligned with this creature. It was not a mutation. It was design. He began drafting the classification manually, hands moving in quiet mechanical precision. Biological heresy file, NEM00. Cellular regeneration capacity, extreme, bone structure, reinforced, psychic resonance, absent, warp interaction, null rejection, behavioral pattern, pursuit-driven, nonverbal, directive-based, threat level, undetermined, recommended classification, Omega-Red. His stylus paused at that final designation. Omega-Red was reserved for anomalies capable of erasing entire cities if left unchecked. Tyrannid biotitans, Necron tomb constructs, warped monstrosities birthed from the deepest reaches of chaos. To apply it to a single biological entity uncovered on a mining world was unthinkable. Yet the data remained unchanged, and the screens continued to show the creature standing amid the smoldering ruin of a chaos champion. Mendax transmitted the preliminary report through the encrypted channel linking the sanctum to the command bunker. The machine's spirits howled in static as the data traveled, their distress reflecting the strain of carrying such unsettling truth. Colonel Harvek received the file seconds later, but Mendax could not hear his reaction. He only imagined the weight of dread settling onto the commander's shoulders. As the tech priest watched the live feed, Nemesis shifted his posture, the glow in his eye tightening into sharp focus. For a moment, it seemed as though the creature was looking directly into the sanctum, through layers of stone and steel, locking onto something unseen. A faint static tremor ran down Mendax's spine. This entity lacked psychic presence, yet its awareness cut through the hive with unnerving precision. The screens flickered violently. Warp pressure surged around the assembly hall. Cultists screamed into blurred audio feeds. Something massive stirred in the background, pushing at the edges of reality with claws forged from rage. Mendax leaned closer, ignoring the rising alarms. His report was not yet complete. A new phenomenon demanded attention, something that eclipsed the Chaos Champion's death. He prepared a new data log as the ground trembled through the sanctum floor. The warp was opening wider, and Nemesis was turning toward it. The upper levels of Hive Orlia trembled as a thunderous roar of engines descended through the polluted atmosphere. Civilians stumbled in the streets, shielding their eyes as incandescent streaks cut through the smog-draped sky. The unmistakable shape of an inquisitorial gunship pierced the haze, its armored hull etched with purity seals and scorched sigils of authority that no citizen dared question. Where the Inquisition arrived, secrets died, and fear tightened its grip. Inside the cockpit, Inquisitor Serana Cord watched the hive through the visor of her helm, one hand braced against the metal frame as turbulence rocked the craft. Her armor, a blend of functional plating and ceremonial design, gleamed in the dim red cabin lights. The vox beneath her armor hummed faintly with encrypted chatter from her retinue. Her augment eye pulsed with cold blue luminescence as she reviewed the fragmented reports transmitted to her en route. A bioweapon without warp presence, regeneration akin to forbidden xenoforms, immunity to corruption, a trail of dead cultists, and the death of a chaos champion. She read each line with growing stillness, not disbelief. For an agent of the Ordo Xenos, impossibility was merely the first layer of truth. The warp storm had opened a door, and something had stepped through that did not fit any narrative she knew. That alone demanded her presence. The gunship landed atop an armored platform near the Hive's mid-level command spire. Stormtroopers deployed first, forming a perimeter with cold precision. Their armor gleamed black under the platform's flickering lights, rifles angled in crisp formation. Cord disembarked last, her boots striking metal with the calm certainty of someone who carried authority that could override planetary law with a word. Colonel Harvek awaited her, posture stiff but controlled, eyes shadowed with fatigue. He saluted without hesitation. She returned the gesture with minimal movement, her attention already moving past him toward the holographic displays hovering nearby. Harvek summarized the situation with disciplined efficiency: the failed summoning, the anomalous creature, the destruction of an elite company, the champion's death. Cord listened in silence, her augment eye recording, analyzing, categorizing with each measured word he spoke. She asked a single question when he finished: "Where is it now?" Harvek gestured toward the downward corridors, moving deeper into the hive. Its path suggests a direct approach toward areas dense with conflict. Cord understood the significance immediately. Such a creature, drawn toward violence and movement, could inadvertently tear apart the hive's stability simply by following the strongest pulse of war. Her mind raced through potential containment strategies, discarding most as quickly as they formed. A creature without warp resonance could not be influenced by psychic suppression. A creature without fear could not be intimidated. A creature without allegiance could not be reasoned with. She signaled to her retinue: prepare for engagement, non-lethal containment prioritized if feasible. Should it display further escalation, lethal force authorized. Stormtroopers nodded, adjusting their weapons. Her acolytes whispered prayers, reinforcing the words etched into their armor. The machine spirits of their weapons hummed with anxious anticipation. Cord felt the air shift, a faint tremor running through the metal beneath her feet. She turned toward the corridor where Nemesis moved unseen, but not unfelt. A pressure existed there, not psychic, not emotional, something deeper, older, an instinctive dread that came from encountering a predator beyond natural hierarchy. The Inquisition had come to judge, yet this time, even judging felt insufficient. This time, the universe had delivered something that did not recognize law, chaos, or cosmic balance. Cord placed her hand on the grip of her sidearm, its sanctified metal warm under her palm. She began her descent into the hive's depths, her retinue following in disciplined silence. Ahead, the echo of Nemesis's footsteps grew clearer, like distant war drums beating for a battle neither side fully understood. In the ruined assembly hall, the warp's agitation grew unbearable, its pressure pushing against the boundaries of perception like a living storm trapped beneath the skin of reality. The lesser demons destroyed by Nemesis left behind residue that still smoked along the cracked floor, glowing faintly with smolders of unreality. Yet their deaths did not heal the wound, they only widened it. The demagogue, still gathering the shattered remains of his ritualistic composure, felt the air thicken in his lungs. His eyes widened as the warp roared through his mind in violent bursts, not as whispers of favor, but as screams of demand. Something had noticed the interference, something far larger, something enraged. Cracks formed along the summoning circle's broken lines. The stone split with explosive force, sending shards flying. Blood pooled in unnatural shapes, forming symbols the cultists had never intended. Their hands trembled as they backed away, faces twisted between awe and terror. Heat rose rapidly, washing over the hall in suffocating waves. Metal supports glowed red under the sudden surge of supernatural energy. Candles melted into rivers of tallow. Machine spirits within the ruined equipment cried out in static pain. The demagogue sank to his knees, overwhelmed by the pressure. Several cultists collapsed entirely, clutching their skulls as the warp's shriek tore at their sanity. The air stank of burning copper and old slaughter. At the heart of the circle, a new tier formed, slowly at first, then with accelerating violence. Space folded inward, dragging light with it, twisting the room into spirals of distorted geometry. A roar sounded from beyond the veil, one that shook dust from the high beams and caused weaker human hearts to falter. Nemesis turned toward the forming vortex, his shadow cast long by the warping light. His body registered the change in pressure, the shift in temperature, the rising electromagnetic distortion. His breathing apparatus hissed more sharply, tubes expanding with reactive tension. The tier split wide, vomiting flame and smoke. Through it, a shape descended, massive and oppressive. Brass armor marked with runes of violence glinted through the distortion. Wings spread wide, casting the hall in shadow. A horned skull snarled with predatory hunger. A greater demon of corn had arrived. Its form solidified with a sound like mountains grinding together. Hooves struck the ground, cracking the stone even further. The demon rose to its full height, towering over all present, its presence radiating an aura of pure violence. Its whip cracked once, slicing a line of molten rock across the floor. Its axe rested heavily in its clawed grip, dripping with the memory of 1,000 worlds burned. Cultists bowed in fervent terror, their devotion collapsing into ecstatic sobs. The demagogue wept openly, believing his failures redeemed by this unexpected blessing. A greater demon answered his ritual, incomplete though it was, driven not by obedience but by outrage. The demon's burning gaze turned toward Nemesis, sizing the creature with immediate disdain and curiosity. Its perception, forged through eons of war, scanned for a soul, a psychic resonance, a thread to pull, and found nothing. Nemesis stood motionless under that scrutiny. The glow in his eye remained unchanged, not out of courage but out of incapacity for fear. He processed the threat as he processed all threats: mass, motion, weaponry, distance, approach velocity. The demon growled, exhaling fire that distorted the air. This was no mortal, no worshipper, no offering. This was a challenge, an insult, an unclaimed violence standing in its domain. The warp wound pulsed behind it, feeding the being with surges of brutal energy. The demon stepped forward, its weight shaking the entire hall. Cultists scattered to avoid being crushed beneath its hooves. The temperature rose further, sweat dripping from trembling faces. Nemesis lowered into a stance, muscles coiling, regenerative systems surging with renewed function. The greater demon lifted its axe, the blade burning brighter with each passing second, hungry to sever this aberration from existence. And reality held its breath as the first true clash began to form. The bloodthirster shifted its massive weight, wings unfurling with a sound that tore the air like ruptured steel. Its presence drowned the hall in suffocating pressure, a force so overwhelming that cultists collapsed, overcome by the raw fury bleeding from the demon's form. Even the surviving bloodletters lowered their heads in reverent submission. They recognized a master of their blood-soaked hierarchy, a herald of endless war. Nemesis stood alone in the face of that towering monstrosity, his breathing apparatus exhaling slow, measured bursts. His body remained wounded from the earlier clash with Karnox, scorched and torn, yet already knitting itself with mechanical rhythm. His one exposed eye fixed on the massive shape before him, unmoved by the monumental threat approaching. The bloodthirster tilted its head, studying the intruder with burning curiosity. In its perception, everything existed through emotion: fear, hate, rage, desperation, devotion, but this creature radiated none. No warp presence, no spiritual echo, no tether linking it to the real or the unreal. It stood like an empty vessel, animated by a single directive beyond the demon's comprehension. That emptiness offended the bloodthirster. It was a violation, a silence in a universe that should scream. With a thunderous bellow, the demon raised its axe high, flames licking along the brass surface. The roar shook the walls, sending dust raining from the rafters. Cultists clamped hands to their ears, their eyes flooding with tears as the sound crashed through their senses. The demagogue collapsed fully, his mind fraying under the sheer volume of divine rage. Nemesis did not flinch. His head tilted a fraction, recalibrating threat parameters. The bloodthirster charged. The floor cracked beneath each step, stone splitting under the force of its advance. Its wings beat once, a powerful surge that blasted heat through the hall, extinguishing remaining candles and sending smoking debris swirling into the air. Clawed feet left trails of molten rock with each stride. Nemesis launched forward with equal speed, legs coiling and releasing with brutal precision. He met the charge not with hesitation, but with instinctive aggression. His fist slammed into the demon's thigh, the impact sending a shockwave through the creature's colossal frame. The bloodthirster barely staggered. Nemesis was fast, but the demon was war incarnate. It swung its axe downward, aiming to cleave the intruder in two. Nemesis shifted aside at the last instant, the blade carving a deep gouge into the floor where he had stood. Heat rolled off the strike, burning his exposed flesh. The wounds began to reform instantly, tendons stretching back into place. Nemesis countered, leaping upward and driving his elbow into the side of the demon's skull. The blow landed with a crack, forcing the bloodthirster's head to snap sideways. It snarled, eyes burning brighter, insulted by the creature's audacity. The demon's whip snapped through the air, catching Nemesis across the torso and launching him into a pillar. Stone shattered on impact, burying him in rubble. The hall groaned, beams twisting under the damage. Nemesis rose from the broken stone, body repairing itself even as dust still fell from his shoulders. His breathing tubes exhaled with rising intensity. His gaze locked onto the demon again. The bloodthirster roared with renewed fury, insulted that its strike had not ended the foe. This was no mortal. This was no champion. This was a rival, the kind of rival whose defeat would echo through the warp as a victory worthy of its god. It spread its wings and launched forward again, the air buckling around it. Nemesis advanced to meet it, drawn instinctively to the strongest pulse of violence in the room. The two forces collided with enough impact to rattle the hive's foundations, beginning a battle that neither Chaos nor the Imperium had ever witnessed before. The clash that followed seemed to stretch the very fabric of reality around it. Nemesis and the bloodthirster collided in a flurry of motion that defied their towering forms, each strike reverberating through the hall like a hammer, slamming into an anvil forged from the bones of dying worlds. Sparks shot outward as demon-forged brass met mutated flesh, hardened beyond natural limits, creating bursts of heated light that stung the eyes of any who dared watch. The demon swung its axe in wide, devastating arcs, each one powerful enough to reduce armored tanks to molten slag. Nemesis moved through the onslaught with frightening precision, dodging just beyond the reach of the bone-shattering blows. When he could not dodge, he blocked, his forearms taking impacts that would shear lesser beings in half. Each blow opened deep wounds, carving into muscle and tearing flesh apart. Each wound closed seconds later, fibers pulling together in frantic regeneration. Nemesis countered relentlessly. His fists hammered into the bloodthirster's torso, cracking brass plating and forcing the demon's massive frame backward. His tentacle lashed outward, wrapping around a wing joint and tearing free a chunk of demonic flesh. The bloodthirster bellowed, the roar echoing like a storm trapped in a furnace. The shockwave sent cultists collapsing, blood dripping from their noses and ears as the sheer force rattled their skulls. The demon retaliated with fury amplified by centuries of war. Wings spread wide, it launched itself upward and smashed both hooves into Nemesis's chest. The impact sank him into the ground, fracturing the floor beneath him. Stone shattered in radial patterns, dust exploding outward as he was pinned beneath the demon's crushing weight. The bloodthirster raised its axe again, determined to bisect this stubborn intruder. Nemesis's eye flickered with sudden calculation. His hand shot upward, catching the descending axe half-inches from his skull. The demon snarled, applying godlike pressure, but Nemesis held fast. His muscles bulged under the strain, tubes along his back pumping furiously. His other arm swung upward, smashing into the demon's exposed gut. The bloodthirster staggered just enough for Nemesis to twist, rolling out from beneath the demon's shadow. He rose in one fluid movement, leaping onto the demon's back. His fists hammered into the base of its skull, each strike producing a sound like shattering metal. The bloodthirster thrashed wildly, wings battering the air with furious beats. It slammed its back into a pillar, crushing Nemesis between demon and stone. Bone cracked, flesh compressed, yet Nemesis did not release his hold. He dug his fingers into the demon's flaming mane, ripping away chunks of burning sinew. The demon roared, stumbling as blood spilled from new wounds carved into its neck. Its whip struck backward in desperation, the barbed chain embedding itself into Nemesis's torso and dragging him off its back. Nemesis hit the ground hard, but rose again without hesitation. His torso hung open, ribs exposed, organs glistening under the hall's failing lights. The wound pulsed, then began stitching itself closed with unnatural determination. The bloodthirster watched, enraged and bewildered. This creature should have died 10 times over. It should have been reduced to pulp beneath its hooves, yet it stood, unwavering, unbroken. The demon charged once more, flames trailing behind its axe in a burning arc. Nemesis surged forward, meeting the full force of the charge. Their bodies collided with explosive violence, sending shockwaves up through the ceiling and into the hive's supporting struts. Overhead pipes burst. Dust rained down in thick clouds. For a moment they locked together, monster against monster, neither giving ground. Then Nemesis found his opening. His hand shot up, gripping the demon's horn, pulling its head down in a sudden jerk. His other arm drove upward, plunging deep into the exposed seam beneath its jaw. He tore downward with brutal force, ripping through demonic sinew. A roar of agony shook the hall as the demon staggered. Nemesis pressed the attack, striking again and again, driving the bloodthirster back step by thunderous step. Finally, with a decisive wrench, he tore the demon's head free from its shoulders. The bloodthirster collapsed, dissolving into warp flame before its body hit the floor. The hall fell silent except for the steady, mechanical rhythm of Nemesis's breath. The impossible had occurred. Nemesis had slain a greater demon. And somewhere deep within the warp, something ancient took notice. The silence that followed the bloodthirster's collapse felt unnatural, as though the hive itself was holding its breath in disbelief. Warp residue evaporated in thick spirals from the ruined floor, leaving only cracked stone and scorched metal, where the demon's corpse had begun to dissolve. The cultists who remained alive pressed themselves into the shadows, trembling as they watched the monster that now stood alone at the center of the devastation. Nemesis remained still for several seconds, his breathing apparatus hissing with faint irregularity as his body recalibrated. The battle had pushed his regenerative systems to extremes. Sections of his skin hung loose, revealing the wet sheen of freshly grown muscle beneath. Tubes sparked with minor electrical faults, stitching themselves back into functional rhythm as steam drifted from his damaged plating. Slowly, the creature lifted his head. His exposed eye swept the hall, analyzing surviving movement. No immediate threats, no active hostiles, yet the faint vibrations he sensed through the structure told a different story. The hive beyond this ruined chamber pulsed with life and escalating violence. New movements approached from multiple directions. Heavy footfalls, armored mass, a rising surge of thermal signatures. Nemesis processed each one with mechanical clarity. There had been a time in another world, another life, when he moved according to direct orders relayed through implants and command signals. Hunt STARS, eliminate targets, track their positions, adapt to their tactics. That programming had formed the skeleton of his purpose. But here, in this alien world, the familiar directives had faded into static. No handlers, no mission, no command structure. Yet something deeper remained. Nemesis reached inward into the quiet hum of his own engineered instincts and found a pulse of recognition. Motion patterns, structural weaknesses, environmental leverage. He did not possess strategy in the human sense, but he carried something adjacent, an embedded ability to assess surroundings and exploit them with lethal efficiency. He turned toward the hall's towering rear wall, where massive industrial cranes hung dormant against cracked stone. Their chains swayed faintly, stirred by the turmoil of battle. The bloodthirster's earlier rage had fractured the ceiling supports, leaving one crane tilting at a precarious angle. Nemesis scanned the damage, computing load distribution with unnatural speed. The monster took 3 steps toward the structure, each one leaving deeper impressions in the stone. He grasped one of the hanging chains and pulled. The metal groaned in protest, dust drifting as bolts loosened from their sockets. Nemesis pulled again, harder. The first support snapped, sending the crane listing forward. A third pull tore it completely free. The crane crashed into the floor in a screech of metal, its weight collapsing a section of the hall's foundation. Stone buckled, cracks deepened. The damaged ground began to sink in places where demon blood had already eroded the rockcrete. The entire hall shifted, tilting slightly toward the warp breach's collapsed center. Somewhere in the distant corridors beyond the hall, a chaos warband changed course, sensing the tremor but misinterpreting it as structural collapse. Nemesis watched their signatures flicker across his perception. They were heading toward him, more hostiles drawn by the violence. He turned, scanning for the next environmental advantage. Overhead pipes ruptured during the battle now, leaked volatile chem fluids onto the ground. Pools formed around the remaining machinery, their surfaces shimmering with iridescent patterns. Nemesis recognized the scent, a trace memory flickering of combustible compounds used in old labs and test chambers. He stepped back toward the chemical spill and drove his fist into a damaged luminary panel. Sparks rained across the puddle. A small fire guttered to life. He nudged it outward with a sweep of his boot, letting flame crawl along the path of spilled chemicals, tracing it toward the corridor from which fresh enemies would arrive. The flames spread silently. Nemesis positioned himself behind a collapsed pillar, body lowering into a stance honed by countless encounters. He breathed steadily, the mechanical rhythm marking the calm between storms. His tactical instinct had awakened not from training, but from embedded necessity. In a world of endless war, it found immediate purpose. He was no longer merely reacting to threats. He was shaping the battlefield. And through the distant corridors, Chaos warriors marched closer, unaware that the monster they sought had already begun preparing their welcome. The air cracked with violent energy as the bloodthirster's severed head dissolved into spirals of burning vapor. Its massive body collapsed in segments, each chunk of demonic flesh melting away into the warp as it lost cohesion. Crimson flames rolled down the creature's form like molten wax, marking the end of a being forged from pure hatred. The warp howled in protest, its voices echoing faintly before being swallowed by closing fractures in reality. For the cultists, the moment seemed impossible. A greater demon of Khorne, immortal, ancient, a symbol of the war god's supremacy, had fallen in direct combat. They stared at the space where the bloodthirster had stood, their minds reeling as they tried to comprehend the implications. The strongest of them bowed their heads in involuntary surrender. The weakest had already fled or died. Only Nemesis remained standing. He stood amid the aftermath, surrounded by molten stone and drifting ash. His arm hung damaged at his side, bone visible through burned flesh. His chest still bore the imprint of the demon's hooves. His lower jaw had been split, exposing muscle beneath the torn skin. Every breath escaped through damaged tubes in harsh rattles. Yet he did not fall. His wounds pulsed with raw vitality as regeneration reasserted itself. Torn muscle fibers stretched outward like pale roots seeking soil. Bone fragments dissolved and reformed in smooth, mechanical patterns. Even the ripped jaw began to realign, closing into a grotesque but functional symmetry. The ground beneath him trembled, not from the demon's death, its essence had nearly fully vanished, but from the structural collapse triggered by their battle. The hall's supporting pillars had cracked, some reduced to rubble, others leaning at precarious angles. Machinery toppled, clattering across broken tile. Sparks showered down from overhead pipes, joining lingering trails of flame. Nemesis surveyed the room with slow attention. His head turned incrementally, analyzing residual motion signatures. No immediate threats, no active hostiles, only the faintest heartbeat of the few cultists still alive, too weak or frightened to move. Their presence registered, then was dismissed. They did not fit his internal pattern of priority targets. Yet something else drew his focus. Beneath the fading warp residue, deeper vibrations pulsed through the hive structure. Heavy rhythmic impacts, coordinated troop movements, metallic scraping from armor, the hum of power packs. He had felt these movements earlier, faintly drowned by the prophet's chanting and the bloodthirster's roar, but now, in the absence of immediate conflict, they grew clear. Imperial forces were reforming above. Chaos warbands were closing in below. Both converged on the same vector, Nemesis's path. He turned toward the damaged exit corridor, noting the chemical fire he had set creeping along the floor. Flames reflected dimly across his metal buckles and exposed muscle, casting him in shifting hues of orange and red. The heat did not deter him. His skin blistered, then healed as he stepped through the burning passage. Behind him, the last remnants of the bloodthirster shrieked as they dissolved fully. The warp's tear over the summoning circle sealed abruptly, snapping shut with a sound like a collapsing lung. The air thinned. The pressure of unreality lifted. Chaos had lost its champion on Vordran IX, and the Imperium had gained a threat far more unpredictable. Nemesis walked through the corridor without looking back. The flames curled around his ankles, flickering across his form, casting his shadow long across the hall's ruin. Each step marked the end of one nightmare and the beginning of another. As the echoes of battle faded, the hive itself seemed to recoil from what had transpired. The future of Vordran IX had shifted irrevocably, pushed into a path shaped by a creature that recognized no side, no god, no moral weight, only motion, only pursuit. And somewhere far beyond the hive's walls, other powers felt the bloodthirster's fall, turning their attention toward the anomaly that had committed the unthinkable. The deeper levels of Hive Orlia shuddered with distant reverberations as Inquisitor Serana Cord advanced through the labyrinth of metal corridors, her retinue moving with practiced symmetry behind her. The oppressive silence between tremors revealed a truth she had rarely encountered. This hive held its breath, as though it feared to make noise, lest it draw the attention of something prowling its arteries. Her augment eye picked up faint anomalies as they neared the Manufactorum district: elevated temperatures, fluctuating power signatures, erratic movement patterns. Each one matched fragments of Mendax's transmitted data, all led toward a single point. Nemesis. Cord raised her fist, signaling a silent halt. Stormtroopers froze, their hellguns angled downward to reduce reflective noise. The corridor ahead, choked with smoke and chemical residue, pulsed faintly with the echo of seismic shock. A section of wall had collapsed, revealing a path deeper into the assembly hall where the battle had unfolded. Cord stepped forward, her boots crunching over shattered debris. Her cloak trailed behind her in measured sweeps. Her face remained hard and focused, a mask forged through decades of interrogations and exterminations. Yet within her thoughts, something colder stirred. Not fear, she had long abandoned such emotions, but the awareness that she walked toward an entity whose nature eluded classification. They entered what remained of the hall. The stench of burned flesh and warp residue clung to the air like a suffocating shroud. Stone tiles lay fractured in spiderweb patterns. Machinery had been twisted into grotesque shapes, its components fused by supernatural heat. And in the center of the devastation, a trail of enormous footprints led deeper into the darkness. Cord's augment eye flickered with analytical patterns. She followed the trail without hesitation. Her stormtroopers advanced cautiously behind her, their armor crackling faintly as they stepped over the remnants of demonic ichor that still smoked on the floor. A low hiss echoed from within the gloom. Not a whisper, not a voice. Breathing. Mechanical, rhythmic, relentless. The stormtroopers raised their weapons. Cord lifted her hand to keep them still. From the far end of the corridor, a shape emerged through drifting vapor. Bent slightly from battle damage, its form was unmistakable, towering, stitched flesh glistening with chemical sheen, straps and metal buckles slick with blood, tubes pulsing in violent cadence. Its skin still bore scorch marks from the bloodthirster's blows. Its eye glowed faintly in the half-dark. Nemesis stopped, staring at the new arrivals. Weapons hummed to life, targeting runes locking on his form. Cord alone stepped forward. She spoke, voice low but resonant, her words steady, unadorned by fear. Her creed taught dominance through composure, not volume. Her tone became an anchor amid the tension. She demanded identification. Nemesis did not respond. He did not shift his stance. He did not show hostility. His gaze simply catalogued the threat density of the figures before him. His breathing apparatus hissed in long, measured cycles. Cord studied him in turn, her augment eye magnified torn flesh, scanning cellular movement. The regeneration was beyond tyrannid patterns. His musculature adapted between breaths. His bones reinforced themselves beneath healing skin. She realized he was adjusting to her presence. Stormtroopers tightened their grips, reading her silence as danger. Their hellguns angled upward. Without looking away from Nemesis, Cord lowered her hand again. She understood instinctively. A wrong move here, a single twitch, could end her entire company. Nemesis took one step forward. Weapons snapped upward. Cord's voice cut the air, steady as stone. Hold. Nemesis halted. His breathing deepened, a sign of internal recalibration. He did not charge. He did not retreat. He simply waited. Cord read the tension in his posture. He did not perceive them as STARS. He did not identify them as targets. Not yet. Her next words emerged softly, with the calm weight of judgment. "Stand down." A command not aimed at him, but her own. Stormtroopers hesitated, then slowly lowered their weapons. Nemesis watched them, processing, measuring, adapting. For the first time since his arrival, an implied stalemate formed. Not peace, not understanding, simply a pause. And in that fragile pause, Cord realized why Harvek feared this creature more than any demon. Nemesis did not belong to chaos. Nemesis did not belong to the Imperium. Nemesis belonged only to the hunt. And nothing in the galaxy could command a creature forged from commandless purpose. High above Vordran IX, the night sky tore open once more, not with the swirling chaos of a storm, but with the harsh, deliberate emergence of warp-forged metal. One by one, the colossal silhouettes of chaos warships clawed their way out of the void, their hulls etched with symbols glowing like infected wounds. Engines belched reddish exhaust as they stabilized, forming a formation that blotted out the upper atmosphere with malignant precision. From the surface, citizens stared through cracked windows and broken spires as the burning shapes drifted into place. Their forms resembled bladed leviathans, armored with jagged plating that shifted like living tissue. Smaller escort ships circled them in patterns reminiscent of carrion birds guarding their kill. Hive Orlia's external auspex arrays struggled to lock onto the invaders. Their machine spirits howled in protest, flickering between conflicting readings as the enemy vessels scrambled Imperial sensors with warp static. Red warning sigils bloomed across every command terminal in the Hive. Inside the command bunker, Colonel Harvek stood frozen before the tactical display as the first massive icons appeared on the upper screen. Battleship-class signatures, cruiser formations, boarding craft preparing descent vectors. His officers reacted instantly, shouting override commands, recalibrating defensive batteries, coordinating with what remained of the planetary defense grid. Harvek's voice cut through the chaos with practiced authority. All batteries to high alert, void shields to maximum reserve, prepare for orbital strafing. But the defense grid was a skeleton of its former strength. Months of conflict and constant cult sabotage had left its systems weakened. Shield capacitors flickered, automated cannons jammed. Only a handful of macro turrets powered fully, their machine spirits desperate for revenge. And the Chaos Fleet knew it. Within moments of arrival, the lead ship, a towering battleship adorned with a prow shaped like a screaming skull, fired its first barrage. Fire cascaded from the orbiting Titan in streaks of molten red. Atmospheric friction turned them into lances of fire that pierced the clouds and slammed into the planetary surface. Whole city blocks disintegrated beneath the bombardment. Shockwaves rolled across the Hive, rattling foundations, shattering windows across kilometers, sending civilians fleeing the collapsing structures. Promethium lines ruptured, igniting the lower levels in sheets of blue flame. The Hive's Vox towers lit up with desperate transmissions. Dozens of voices cried for assistance, for evacuation, for intervention. None came. Chaos had arrived with full intent, not of conquest, but annihilation. Inquisitor Cord felt the tremors shake the corridor as she stood facing Nemesis. Dust drifted down like ash, coating her armor in pale streaks. Her augment eye flickered with updated tactical information, carrying the unmistakable signature of a fleet commanded by champions older than the Hive itself. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if consulting an internal truth. A greater demon has fallen, and chaos comes to answer the wound. Nemesis turned his head slightly, recognizing the vibrations. The planet itself shifted beneath them, the heartbeat-like hum of distant detonations guiding his attention upward. The bombardment was a beacon, a call, a surge of movement to chase. His breathing accelerated with faint intensity. Chaos was bringing reinforcements, and Nemesis recognized instinctively the presence of new targets. Above them, boarding torpedoes launched from the orbiting warships, burning trails carved across the sky, each capsule carrying terminators, warbands, corrupted machines of war. Their descent roared like the cry of a falling god. Harvek's voice boomed across the Hive's emergency Vox system. All units brace for impact. Boarding forces incoming. Defensive positions now. Inquisitor Cord lifted her gaze, feeling the Hive tremble under incoming fire. Chaos was descending. Nemesis was watching. And Vordran IX was moments away from collapsing into a war that no mortal soldiers could hope to contain. As the bombardment intensified above, the Hive's internal structure groaned under the weight of cascading shockwaves. Metal beams warped, lumens shattered, conduits ripped from their housings in showers of sparks. The corridor where Nemesis stood became a trembling artery of vibrating steel, every tremor sending fresh dust raining from the overhead supports. Nemesis lifted his head, breathing apparatus hissing more sharply as he absorbed the new rhythm spreading through the Hive. The constant, steady pulse of distant explosions, the vibration of armored boots impacting the ground above, the hum of descending insertion craft, the electromagnetic whine of gunship engines preparing for breach. Each signal blended into a single pattern, a convergence of movement and hostility. Targets. The Hive spire above, central command, ecclesiarchy shrines, defense hubs, pulsed with life signs and weapon signatures. The concentration of force echoed through the steel, drawing Nemesis's focus like a flame draws a moth. Despite lacking his former command directives, something inside him recognized the largest cluster of potential combatants and moved to engage. Inquisitor Cord sensed his shift immediately. Her stormtroopers stepped back, weapons rising despite her gesture for restraint. Nemesis's posture had changed, his stillness fractured into coiled intent, his stance lowered, his torso angled slightly, reading the structural path of the Hive the way predators read terrain. He was aligning his motion with the beating heart of the city toward the spire, where the chaos incursion would strike hardest. Cord took a single step forward, voice steady despite the new quake rattling the corridor. She understood what his movement meant, not strategy, not alliance, only instinct. Instinct that would lead him into the collapsing war between Imperial defenders and Chaos boarding forces. Instinct that would turn him loose upon the most concentrated conflict in the city. She attempted to halt him, raising a hand, not in command but in warning. Stand still. Nemesis did not understand the meaning. He recognized only a figure stepping into his path. His breathing deepened, steam drifting from his jaw as his regenerative systems still worked overtime. Stormtroopers tensed. A few flicked their safety switches off, hellguns glowing brighter. Nemesis began to move forward. Cord reacted instantly, stepping aside. Her training told her when a line must not be crossed. She watched him pass, a force of nature wrapped in flesh, each step rattling loose bolts from the floor panels. She spoke softly to her soldiers. Do not engage. You will not survive it. Nemesis continued through the warped hallway, pushing aside twisted metal as if parting vines in a jungle. He walked with purpose, not haste. His steps were heavy but sure, guided by the sounds of the Hive's dying heartbeat. Ahead, stairwells spiraled upward into smoke-dripping shafts. Gantries swayed above vast drop chasms. Bridges buckled from earlier detonations. Nemesis navigated them with the same relentless certainty he displayed in battle. his weight cracking stone plates but never destabilizing his footing. The hive spire loomed overhead, visible through angled gaps in the metalwork, its enormous silhouette cut against the red-stained sky, wreathed in smoke from fresh impacts. Sirens wailed up its length, each one harmonizing with the next in a rising chorus of desperation. Searchlights flared across the structure, tracking the descent of incoming drop pods. Nemesis reached a wide industrial lift shaft, missing its platform. The fall extended into darkness below, but above dozens of floors lay the route to the spire's heart. The creature stepped to the edge and leaped. His body smashed into the opposite wall, claws of exposed bone digging into the rockcrete. He scaled upward in brutal, rhythmic motions, pulling himself higher as metal crumbled under the force of his grip. Sparks rained down with every ascending strike of his hands and feet. Above him, explosions rattled the shaft. A drop pod screamed past, its thrusters burning bright, narrowly missing him as it descended toward a deeper sector. Nemesis ignored it. His focus remained fixed on the signatures above, stronger, louder, more numerous. The hive spire throbbed like the central organ of a wounded beast. Nemesis climbed faster. He had no mission. He had no allegiance. But the spire held motion, and Nemesis followed motion. With each upward haul, the sounds of battle grew louder. The hive, the chaos incursion, the Imperium's desperate stand, they all converged toward the highest levels. And Nemesis ascended, ready to walk into the eye of the storm. The upper reaches of Hive Orlia thundered as boarding torpedoes tore into its armored exterior, embedding themselves deep within the ancient ferrocrete. The impact shook entire districts, loosening balcony railings, toppling manufactorum stacks, and shattering stained-glass ecclesiarchial murals. Fire bled from ruptured fuel lines as alarms screamed through every corridor. Vordran IX was no longer a world merely bracing for war, but a world being drowned in it. From the largest boarding pod, a new presence stepped into the hive's collapsing arteries. Cataphractii Terminator armor scraped against the torn metal of the insertion tunnel, sparks cascading like falling embers. The warriors who emerged carried chain fists dripping warp oil, combi-bolters ready to spit mass-reactive devastation. Symbols of the blood god glowed faintly upon their pauldrons, carved deep into plates centuries old. These were not common traitor marines. These were veteran reapers from the Long War, warriors who had carved their legacy in the bones of fallen loyalists across 1,000 ravaged systems. Their leader, a hulking Terminator bearing a horned helm blackened by centuries of slaughter, lifted his combi-bolter and scanned the corridor ahead. His armor's internal spirits howled warnings of seismic distortions in the hive's infrastructure. His display flickered with thermal signatures, some imperial, some cultist, some twisted faintly by warp residue, and then one stood apart. Massive, singular, moving upward. The anomalies. The Bloodthirster's death had echoed through the warp like a snapped chain, drawing the Terminator warband with predatory focus. If their god's champion had been slain, then vengeance was owed. They marched as one, each step a drumbeat marking their approach through the hive's arteries. Above them, Nemesis climbed the lift shaft with relentless grace, claws tearing through stone like soft clay. His breath hissed in steady bursts, the only sound accompanying the groaning metal around him. He pulled himself through a broken access hatch into a wide corridor lit by emergency lamps that flickered in spasms of dying power. The floor trembled beneath his weight, vibrations spreading outward like ripples through water. The Terminators sensed him before they saw him. The leader raised a clenched fist, halting the warband. Their weapons shifted in eerie unison, barrels angling down the length of the corridor as they prepared to meet the threat. The air between them tightened, as if the hive itself held tension in its walls. Nemesis turned the corner. His form emerged through drifting smoke, scarred, towering, flesh knitted imperfectly from wounds earned against the bloodthirster. His eye gleamed with cold, mechanical recognition as the Terminator's armored silhouettes came into view. For a heartbeat, the corridor fell silent. Then the warband opened fire. Mass reactive shells shrieked through the air, impacting Nemesis's torso in violent sprays of tearing flesh and bone. Explosions flared across his shoulders and ribs, tearing open wounds that exposed organs beneath. Shrapnel embedded itself into walls, scattering fragments of stone and metal across the floor. Nemesis staggered under the assault, but did not fall. His body swayed, then stabilized. Steam curled from the fresh wounds as regeneration surged through him. Flesh rethreaded itself, bones fused in wet cracks, skin reformed like molten wax cooling. The Terminators paused only to reload, their movements efficient, disciplined, merciless. Nemesis surged forward. The corridor erupted into chaos as the monster collided with the armored warriors, each impact ringing like struck anvils. He tore through the first Terminator's combibolter, ripping it from armored gauntlets before smashing the warrior into the wall with enough force to dent the Ferrocrete. Another brought his chain fist down in a sweeping arc. Nemesis caught the gauntlet mid-swing. Sparks sprayed, flesh burned, yet his grip did not loosen until the Terminator's shoulder joint cracked. The warband tightened their formation, creating a wall of armor and blades around him. Combi-flamers spewed liquid fire. Chain fists revved in thunderous unison. Warp-tainted blades stabbed in perfect coordination. Nemesis tore through them, one by one. The battle became a storm of sparks and gore, echoing through the hive like a warning bell. Cataphractii armor buckled under his strikes. Helmets shattered. Hydraulic systems burst. The corridor transformed into a narrow grave for warriors who had survived millennia of carnage, yet fell to a creature without a soul. When the final Terminator crashed to the ground, armor cracked open, Nemesis stood amid a ruin of metal and blood. His breathing deepened, slow and steady, as his injuries closed again. Above him, the hive's spire waited. And Nemesis moved onward. The higher Nemesis climbed, the louder the hive's death throes became. Gunfire rattled through ventilation shafts. Artillery strikes trembled along support beams. Screams traveled through pipes like whispers carried along metal veins. The hive was becoming a living tomb of collapsing staircases, ruptured valves, broken gantries, and throughout its labyrinth, battles ignited and extinguished in rapid succession. Nemesis walked through the chaos with the stillness of a machine built for only one function. His footsteps echoed across fractured walkways, reverberating between towering columns of rusted steel. Sparks drifted from severed power conduits overhead, drifting like fireflies in the murk. Flames licked along floor grates. Smoke curled through shattered windows. He passed through a wide hall where Imperial guardsmen and Chaos cultists clashed in desperate melee. Both parties froze when they saw him. For a single, breathless instant, the combatants held still, Imperials with blades raised, cultists with wild hunger burning in their eyes. Neither side knew what Nemesis was. Both understood instinctively that he was not theirs. A guardsman fired a warning shot. Nemesis ignored him. Chaos cultists screamed praises. Nemesis ignored them too. He walked directly through the middle of their battle, unbothered by the chaos surrounding him. Lasfare scorched his skin. Autogun rounds lodged briefly in his regenerating flesh before being pushed out like splinters. A cultist rushed at him with a serrated blade, chanting fervently. Nemesis backhanded him with such force that the man folded upon himself before crumpling to the ground in silence. The guardsmen watched him go, unsure whether they had been spared or merely overlooked. In another sector, a ranking sorcerer of Tzeentch hurled bolts of warp energy from the top of a metal dais, his body wrapped in shimmering distortion. Fire danced in geometric shapes around him as he laughed through a voice not entirely human. He noticed Nemesis below and cast a vortex of screaming light directly at him, expecting the creature to be torn apart. The warp touched Nemesis and shuddered. The vortex flickered as if confused, its edges dissolving into chaotic fragments. Nemesis continued forward unfazed. The sorcerer recoiled in disbelief, attempting another spell. This time, the warp energy refused to manifest. It recoiled from Nemesis's presence, unable to latch onto something with no psychic anchor. In desperation, the sorcerer raised his staff. Nemesis seized the dais's support beam, tore it free, and hurled it upward. The metal spike impaled the sorcerer through the torso, pinning him to the wall like an insect. His final scream warped into a gurgle. Nemesis resumed his path, leaving the corpse hanging like a broken sigil. The hive trembled under another orbital strike. Glass rained from overhead. A bridge collapsed beside him, crashing into the abyss of the lower hive. Nemesis stepped across a narrow pipe without hesitation, his balance perfect despite the shaking structure. He scaled a section of angled support beams, moving with the effortless precision of a predator, not a brute. As he reached the upper levels, the air changed. Less smoke, more electricity. A surge of concentrated warfare pulsed from the spire above like a beacon. Heavy plasma discharges cracked across the distance. The thrum of Imperial void shields hummed faintly. Servitors chanted maintenance prayers. Vox channels screamed with conflicting orders. Nemesis's breathing accelerated. The density of movement increased. The number of life signs clustered in the spire exceeded anything he had encountered so far. The hive's heart beat faster, churning with desperation and violence. He followed that pulse. Bodies hung from broken railings. Melted armor pooled across the floor. Astartes' bodies, loyal and traitor alike, lay scattered like fallen statues. Nemesis stepped calmly through the carnage, his eye flickering with cold evaluation. A distant explosion, closer, sharper than before, sent a tremor up the spire. Nemesis turned his head toward the source. He was almost there. He increased his pace. The hive spire loomed over Nemesis like a wounded titan, its upper reaches wrapped in smoke and burning debris. Vast stained glass windows shattered outward as explosions rippled through the interior, raining glittering shards over the city below. Vox arrays flickered violently, their antennae twisting as distant chaos sorcery interfered with Imperial transmissions. Dozens of armored balconies jutted from the spire's surface, some intact, most broken, a few dangling precariously from half-melted supports. Nemesis emerged from a collapsed access shaft into the spire's lowest interior platform. Here, the air crackled with static discharge from malfunctioning defense grids. Imperial personnel rushed through the wide halls, officers shouting orders, medici dragging wounded soldiers, ecclesiarchal priests chanting litanies to hold back panic. Every face carried exhaustion. Every movement carried desperation. They froze when they saw him. The creature stepped from the dust like a nightmare-given form. Still bleeding from dozens of half-healed wounds, Nemesis towered above the scrambling soldiers. His exposed muscle glistened with chemical sheen. His torn jaw hung unevenly, knitting into crooked alignment. His breathing echoed like a damaged engine, slow and heavy. For a moment, those present seemed unsure whether to run, pray, or fire. Nemesis ignored them. He scanned the platform, tracking the vibrations that pulsed through the spire's central support column. The density of moving targets above drew him like a gravitational pull. The spire's highest levels churned with force, chaos boarding teams, Imperial defenders, Terminators, Psychers, officers screaming orders through sparking vox links. Nemesis moved toward the main ascent passage. A commissar stepped forward, las pistol drawn, voice trembling, but resolute as he raised the weapon. In any other circumstance, his courage would have inspired the soldiers. Here, it only added another beat to Nemesis's sensory field. Nemesis kept walking. The commissar fired. The law's round struck Nemesis's chest and dissipated in a hiss of melting tissue. Nemesis lifted his hand without hesitation, seized the commissar by the torso, and hurled him across the platform. His body struck a pillar and fell limp. The soldiers did not fire again. They scattered. Nemesis reached the central ascent, an enormous column shaft spiraling upward through the heart of the spire. Broken lifts hung suspended like corpses caught in webs of snapped cables. Smoke drifted downward from battles raging above. The sounds echoed through the metal, chain blades tearing, bolters cracking, the war cries of traitors, the shouts of loyalists. Nemesis stepped into the shaft, looked upward, and climbed. His hands tore into the reinforced walls, crushing through adamantine plating designed to withstand explosions. He pulled himself higher with each motion, moving faster than the crumbling environment should allow. Wind whipped around him as the shaft's vertical tunnel funneled updrafts from burning sectors far below. As he ascended, soldiers on maintenance balconies caught glimpses of the monster, turning the shaft's interior into his own ladder. Some shouted warnings, others fled deeper into the spire. Nemesis did not care. He broke through a maintenance grill into a higher level where Chaos Terminators clashed with Imperial Crusaders. The combatants paused mid-strike as the intruder emerged. Nemesis crossed the battlefield in a straight line, disrupting formations without intention. Traitors who tried blocking his path were crushed under massive blows. Loyalists who stood frozen survived only because he had no interest in them. A traitor Terminator swung a chain fist at Nemesis's back. Nemesis twisted with unnatural speed, caught the gauntlet, and smashed the warrior's helm into a wall, splintering the skull beneath. The battle around him dissolved into confusion. Both sides realized the truth. Nemesis was not reinforcements. Nemesis was a catastrophe passing through their war. He reached the final ascent, a narrow spiral leading to the spire's command level. Every vibration through the stone grew sharper, every distant shout louder. The density of hostile signatures peaked directly above. Nemesis's breathing intensified. He climbed the last segment. And as he breached the top platform, the spire, heart of Vordran IX, awakened fully to the presence of a new monster. One neither Chaos nor Imperium could claim. One the galaxy was unprepared to face, if you hunger for more tales of impossible encounters. In the dark Millennium, smash that subscribe button, and the Emperor protects those who support the channel.